Lake District, England. Do you know where the Lake District is, Alexander?
Absolutely. One of the most beautiful areas of England, and welcome from the Lake District. And by the way, I was there last year having a wonderful holiday, near Lake Windermere and all those wonderful places. One of the most magical parts of England. I mean, you feel you're transported into the world of King Arthur and amazing mountains and lakes. It's just stunning.
Awesome. Luxembourg, New Jersey, Melbourne, Puebla, Mexico. I have been to Puebla, Mexico, actually, Alexander. It is a beautiful place. Mexico is a beautiful country.
Wow.
Let's see. Texas, Florida, Canada, Scottsdale, AZ. All right. Used to live in Scottsdale, AZ, as a matter of fact. So welcome to everybody from Arizona and from Connecticut and from North Carolina. Alexander, let's get rolling. Look, we've got Serbia as well, and Kentucky, Michigan. Great. We've got a lot of news. I mean, it's just all over the place, to be quite honest. I don't even know where to begin and where to end. So look, this is what we'll do. Let's just get everybody's questions. I don't know if you have any opening comments or remarks. Let's get everyone's questions.
Yeah, I do.
From Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, Super Chats, and of course locals. And we'll just try to go for about like an hour and a half. This is not going to be a 5-hour stream. This will be like about an hour and a half. Max 2 hours at most. And we'll just let's hear from all of you. What do you guys want to talk about? Alexander, anything to open up with?
Yes, I do just want to open up because today we're going to again obviously focus on Ukraine, Russia, and all of this. But I'm now really starting to fear that the second front is about to open because there was massive Chinese exercises around Taiwan. The Chinese have been issuing incredibly strong statements over Taiwan. They were furious about Bob Menendez and Lindsey Graham's trip to Taiwan. And they made it absolutely clear that they feel that the US is intending or trying to provoke them into a conflict over Taiwan. And they're making it absolutely clear that they're ready. And they've also taken incredibly strong reaction to Janet Yellen's statements about China losing status because it's not criticizing Russia. So I'm increasingly getting the sense, and I have to say this, of an administration that is now firing guns in all directions. It's got a massive crisis that it's created in Europe, and it's about to start another massive crisis in the Pacific as well. There must be people in the Pentagon, I'm guessing, who must be tearing out their hair as they contemplate what these people are doing. But, we got to be ready for this. These were some of the strongest statements I've seen coming out of China in a very long time. Much stronger, by the way, than any I saw during the time of the Trump administration.
Yeah, we're heading towards something really, really bad in the South Pacific. That's for sure. That's for sure. We've been saying this for a while now.
I mean,
we're getting closer.
I have to say, just as I didn't expect the situation in Ukraine to get spiral out of control as quickly as I did, I underestimated the extent to which some people wanted to see a war there. So I'm afraid we're seeing the same pattern now over Taiwan, and it's the same people.
It's hard to understand what exactly is their end game with all of this.
Well, it
really is.
Well, I have no idea what the end. I wonder sometimes whether they even have one. I mean, it's as I said, to involve the US in a war, in effect, on two fronts, because that's what it would amount. It wouldn't be a kinetic war, I hope. Though you never know with these people. But I mean, we already have crisis with commodity supply chains. If you add to that a further crisis in manufacturing supply chains, which is what would happen with China, well, I mean, it doesn't even bear thinking about. But the problem with these people is they constantly overestimate what the United States can do to overcome these positions. They behave as if the situation isn't as it was in 1990 when the US was the global superpower. They think it's as it was in 1950 when the US single-handed accounted for something like 60% of the entire global economy. Well, it doesn't. And, you know, this is, it's an administration, or at least the neocons with it, it seemed to me to be completely out of control.
All right. Bakajan wants to know, which statements are you referring to, Alexander?
Right. There was a statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry in response to Janet Yellen's statement. But there have also been a whole series of statements by Chinese military officials in respect of these exercises that China has been conducting in and around Taiwan. And these Chinese military officials, I can't give you their names off, their Chinese names, and I don't speak Chinese, so they don't hold in my mind. But one was a spokesman for China's Eastern Command, another was a spokesman for China's Defense Ministry, and the third was the spokesman for China's Foreign Ministry. And all three of these spokesmen, so we're talking about actual officials, said that the United States is playing with fire over Taiwan. It clearly linked these massive military exercises that had been taking place in and around Taiwan by the Chinese to Lindsey Graham's and Bob Menendez's visit to Taiwan. And they made it absolutely clear, these statements make absolutely clear China's determination and readiness to act militarily if it is provoked too far.
I wonder if China is ready.
I think they are. I think, well, actually, it's an interesting thing, because there was a Global Times thing which said, you know, that they could be even more ready than they are. So, I mean, they still haven't completed all their military preparations, but they are ready enough, as they see it, to act decisively if they must.
Oh, boy. I'm left speechless, honestly.
Oh, I am absolutely as well. I mean,
if something breaks out in China, it's... Yeah.
I mean, you know, as I said, we are sleepwalking, because most people are. We're sleepwalking into a global calamity like we've not seen since the end of the Second World War. And I mean, it's difficult to keep up, as you correctly said at the start of this program, with the news. As I said, I was speechless as I was reading all of this last night and this morning.
I mean, do you actually believe that? I mean, do you actually believe it, though, that China would act on this, or the U.S. would act on this?
Yes, I do. I think that the Chinese, like the Russians, feel that they've been pushed to a point where they have no choice. The question is not whether the Chinese will react, it's whether the U.S. will test them.
What do you mean?
And by the way,
we'll test them,
whether the US will go on pushing forward with military cooperation with Taiwan, supporting the political leadership in Taiwan, supporting Taiwan's aspirations to declare some kind of independence from China. And I mean, they made it very, very clear that, you know, that basically they want all official contacts between the US and Taiwan at the, you know, the top level to end, which I think the US will not do.
Yeah, and Jake the Snake Sullivan made some very belligerent comments as well with regards to not only with Taiwan and China, but he roped in the rest of the EU as well, pretty much. I mean, basically, whatever these neocons do, they're dragging everyone with them.
They're dragging everybody. And while we're on the topic of Jake Sullivan, he also made it absolutely crystal clear that the Russians will never get their money back, that those central bank reserves are gone forever. I mean, you know, so, I mean, it was, I mean, you know, presumably, even if Putin falls, the Russians pull out of Ukraine, they agree to every single demand that the US is making of them, even then the US will take their money.
That's not the right question, though. It's not about the fact that they're not going to get their money back. It's about who's going to get this money that they've stolen. Where's it going to?
Absolutely.
I think is the billion, not the million, the $300 billion question.
Well, Jake Sullivan basically made it clear that, you know, they were already thinking of all sorts of people, that they already had various people in mind.
And everyone wonders, how do politicians get so rich? How do they get so wealthy? There you have it.
Yeah. I'm going to make a guess. A lot of this money is going to be recycled into the arms industry in some form.
Well,
so this is
into
going
the
to
arms
create a nice
industry,
slush
into
fund.
the stock market,
Yeah, well,
into the board of
absolutely,
directors,
but I mean, a lot of it
into
will
the
be
consultants,
exactly,
into, I mean,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. But a lot of it
So,
will be used basically as a kind of slush fund to pay the MIC for more weapons that will be recycled around the world. You know,
the accountants, the lawyers.
Which, yeah.
That's how you wash money.
Yeah.
This is how you wash it.
Absolutely.
And that's what they're going to do. They're going to wash it.
Yeah.
They're going to clean it.
I mean,
and they're going to distribute it.
I know. It has more and more the look of a pirate raid about it.
Yeah, that's because that's what it is. And interestingly enough, Russia said that they're not going to nationalize any of the businesses in Russia because that would be equivalent to acting like raiders, like pirates.
Yes.
So how about that?
It's interesting, isn't it? Russia protecting private property and the US seizing it. I mean, the world, it really has turned upside down. But anyway, there we go.
That's so right. That is so right. Okay, let's see what.
Let's press on. Let's press on. More questions. Let's not take up more time. Let's just go ahead and answer questions.
Commander Crossfire says the war is not an ordinary war. It is the war of the entire Russian people, not only to eliminate the danger hanging over our heads, but to aid all peoples groaning under the yoke of fascism.
More and more Russians are talking like that. The Russian Officers Union has just made a similar statement to that effect. And I gather that's resonating right across the Russian population. And to come back to a program that Alex and I made yesterday, the big question is, does the Kremlin itself understand this? Do they understand that they are in effect in what you might call a people's war type situation? Because, this isn't just a war of statesmen and statecraft. It's not, like the kind of 18th century wars where the king sent his armies and trying to do various things, and if he didn't, he could pull back or he could negotiate. This is not like that anymore, not as far as Russians are concerned, and that's indisputably true.
Tucker Addis says politicians get rich through their colossal corruption and greed, not to mention their arrogance and lust for power and control. Very true.
Yes.
And Adier 3 says, is NATO
but to an extent today, to an extent today that I've never seen. Carry on.
Yeah. Is NATO actually popular in Finland? Who's watching from Finland? People that are watching from Finland, just real quick, Alexander, put a 1 if NATO is popular, put a 2 if it's not. Go ahead in the chat. Go ahead, Alexander.
I suspect not. I suspect we've had a huge amount of attempt to try to persuade people that this is a good thing. Remember, the media in Finland is like the media everywhere else in Europe. But I think once that settles down, I think you see that most people's ultimate and underlying views have not changed. But of course, they're not going to be given the choice. As we discussed yesterday in another program we did, they're not going to be given a referendum option. So it's all going to be decided for them.
I'm seeing an even split between popular and not popular, pretty much. Almost even.
Yeah,
I'm looking at the chat. Yeah.
Yes.
Almost. Yeah.
Yeah. Almost. Yeah. Well,
is there any way?
If it's an even split, then logically you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it because an even split.
They're not going to go
bear
to the
in
people.
Mind suggests that. No, they're not exactly. But I mean, they will. But they won't go to the people exactly.
Yeah, they've already said as much. Is there any way Russia could tolerate Sweden and Finland in joining NATO?
We did a program about this yesterday. I don't know it's up yet, but I'm going to say straightforwardly, I don't think that this is an existential issue for the Russians in the same way that Ukraine would be. And it's been explained to me that it would actually simplify in some ways their military planning, given that the major point of conflict now is going to be the Arctic and the areas of the Northwest Atlantic. This is the major point of conflict now between the Russians and NATO. So it would mean, for example, that in order to strike at US warships in the North Atlantic, they wouldn't have to find ways around Finland and Sweden and do all kinds of things of that kind. So it's not for them the critical thing that Ukraine joining NATO would be. I'm not in any way suggesting that they want to see it happen. I'm not suggesting that they like this, but as I said, and I'm not, but I think that they understand it's going to happen, and I think they're in a position to counter it.
All right, Kalu25 says, I've heard that YouTube is demonetizing content that goes against the official narrative. I hope your channel won't have any problems. If yes, please let us know how we can support you otherwise. I already do Patreon and wear your hoodies. Thank you, Kalu, for that generous super chat. And
well, you can also,
I mean,
also,
I always get nervous when I get these types of comments, to be honest. What's this? Alexander, there's a delay, Alexander, with your feed, but what did you say?
I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. We're also on other platforms too. So if you run into problems, well,
yeah.
Anyway,
we can't control what they do. We just try to give our analysis and report the news and the truth as to what's going on. And
yes,
there's not much we can do about that. So anyway, yeah. Thank you for that super chat, by the way. David S., thank you for that super stickers. Ariel says, Good Friday to all. Let's kick the truth bucket home and get to the best geopolitical analysis on the planet. Thank you, Zariel, for that.
Indeed.
Gilbert
Can we say very wonderful Good Friday to all people. Bear in mind, we're Orthodox, so for us, Good Friday is next week. But, to those who are celebrating Good Friday today, our Easter greetings to you all.
All right. Gilbert Gall says, best thing on air line. The best. Thanks, gents. Thank you, Gilbert, for that. Thank you, Valley S., for that awesome super chat. And Elena Diaz says, I am now Dia. I am Dia now. No Z. That's right. No Z's. Please, at the end, I want no trouble with democracy. Remember when I told you Z was canceled and you wouldn't believe me? Who could? Yeah. They're canceling Z's. They're canceling V's. They're canceling St. George ribbons.
I know.
They're trying to cancel an entire country, an entire culture.
I know.
In the West.
And part of
in the
part
West. We always
have
to preface this.
In the West. Absolutely. And part of the alphabet as well, it would seem. I mean, this is the...
Yeah, exactly. The Latin alphabet on top of it. Jennifer, thank you very much. Jennifer, thank you very much for that super chat. Greetings from Taiwan. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. And Taiwan is a very hot topic right now. Basil, stay safe. Absolutely. Basil, thank you for that super chat. Harold, thank you for that super chat. Bruce, thank you for that super chat. Raul says, Happy Easter to the drag community. Thank you, Raul. Sanjeva says, the Greek-Lebanese community in Sydney, at least, seems to be either neutral or sympathetic to Russia. It's surprising that the Greek government supports Ukraine. I am bewildered, as there isn't a likely political payoff. Well, there is a political payoff.
Alex,
it's just not a payoff. It's not in the best interest of the people. It's a payoff, but it's not a payoff for the Greek people.
It's certainly a payoff. Exactly. Can I just say, is it true, by the way, what I've heard, that the government has now stopped arms supplies to Ukraine, of heavy weapons at least, that, Nuland's attempt to get them to send surface-to-air missiles and things like that has been refused? Is this true?
Yeah, that is true. That's a statement from the Ministry of Defense after they sent something like four to six planes of weapons to Ukraine, and the people were very, very pissed off in Greece about this. And finally, the Greek government understood that if they don't come out with a statement against sending weapons to Ukraine, then the government was in real deep trouble, really big trouble. Yeah. And they decided to come out with this statement and say, we're not sending any more. And this is kind of a bit of a show. But either way, the Greek government was really upset when Nuland came to town because she blew apart the East Med pipeline. I mean, they've been working around the East Med, Greece, Cyprus, for 10, 15 years. And Nuland comes into town, and one day she says, we don't need gas pipelines. She just said it straight out. No need for gas pipelines. It's LNG. And in 10 years, all of Europe is going to be green. So no need to build pipelines. No need for natural gas being pipelined from the Eastern Mediterranean to Europe. Just buy it from us in LNG. And we're going to be green in 10 years. So don't worry. Everything's good. We're going to be green, everybody. Windmills and solar in 10 years. So there's no need for anyone to panic. Yeah. So people were upset. The political class was upset because they've also got a lot of money tied up in the East Med.
All right.
Yeah. Nad4YT, thank you for that super sticker. And Balke says, but Europe is not a U.S. front. It is.
I wonder. Optimistic view, I'd say.
It is a U.S. front.
To be honest, I have to say, you know, as somebody who is a European completely, I mean, I was born in Greece. Remember, we invented the concept of Europe. You know, the rape of Europa is one of our legends. And who lives in Britain. The complete collapse of Europe as a geopolitical entity just astonishes me. When you consider that, you know, within our lifetime, with the lifetimes of some people, it was still the, you know, the great cockpit of geopolitical world power and cultural power, and now it's descended to this. I mean, it's just, if you really want to talk about the collapse of a civilization, don't look at the US. The US is a thriving and vital place by comparison. Look at Europe.
I agree with that, and I also think that the people in the U.S. are on to the game that Zelensky is pulling, into the game that Biden and the neocons are pulling. I've seen interview after interview, like man on the street types of interviews, where they're asking people in the U.S. what they think about everything going on, and Americans are, they've caught on. A lot of Americans are like, this is a scam. This is a distraction. We know all about Biden and the laptop and Zelensky, and he's an actor. I mean, Americans caught on. I have to say it, at least where I am in Europe, people have not caught on.
No,
for the most part.
Certainly not.
For the most part.
Certainly not in Britain. I mean, not hardly at all here.
Yeah.
I mean, just a few isolated voices.
Where am I here? Hell Warden Watts says, the best biography on Putin. You said before, but I forgot. I think you said Oliver Stone documentary. Is what you
I
said.
think that's right. I don't think there is a good biography of Putin. I haven't read one. I mean, there may be in Russian, but I've certainly not seen one in English. I mean, all of the biographies I've seen, which are identical. I mean, they just basically churn out the same set of stories. I mean, are absolute crap, in my opinion.
Ari, welcome to the Duran community. Great to have you here. And Damnation, welcome to the Duran community. Let's see, Bruce, welcome. Zionic 8, welcome as well. And RDDR says, the failure to monopolize globalization is behind the crisis in the world. Economic weight shifts from West, but liberalism isn't going with it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, quite true. It's a very insightful point, actually. The economic center of gravity is going eastwards, but liberalism is not going in with it because the Asians are not liberals. Emphatically not.
Sinorech says, Macron seems to be distancing himself from the rest of the West just now. Should French troops be paraded by the Russians in Mariupol soon? Do you think it could play a role in the French election? I would like to add that many French alt sources claim Zemmour was cheated votes in favor of Macron. That's interesting.
That is interesting, and it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, as I said, French elections are very controlled. My own personal view is that Macron's comments at the moment are entirely geared to his getting re-elected. He knows perfectly well that the French population are, I mean, we were talking about skepticism in the US. I suspect the one place where you will find a lot of skepticism is in France, because the French are so angry about their general situation. So I think that Macron is moderating his language and his policies to the extent that he is, simply because he knows that is, you know, the route towards getting re-elected. If he were to start using the G word, for example, the French wouldn't like it, or at least a lot of French people wouldn't like it, and it would lose his support. That is one. The second is, if the Russians capture and parade French troops, and I mean real French troops, members of the Foreign Legion, those sort of things, the political impact in France will be enormous. It's difficult for me to say exactly how it would work out, but I can't imagine it would be good news for Macron.
Do you think Le Pen has a chance?
I do think Le Pen has a chance, but I wouldn't, not so much as to put money on it. I'm afraid I don't put money on elections anyway, because, well, I never do. I mean, I'm not a gambling person. French elections are incredibly controlled affairs. Make no mistake about this. The point about Zemmour that somebody made, I mean, I don't know whether it's true, but if it is true, it would not surprise me. Not at all. And bear in mind, if that is also true, then the totality, the aggregate amount of votes that Le Pen and Zemmour would have got together, and even the official figures show that they were more than Macron's total, significantly more than Macron's total. Well, in that case, of course, the difference would be greater still. So, you know, do bear in mind, French elections are incredibly controlled. The only question is, if you control them too much, then, of course, you start to lose complete credibility. And France isn't like the United States, where there is massive residual faith in the political system. In France, on the contrary, there's, you know, this tradition of revolutions, insurrections, those kind of things. So, you know, the French authorities, the French elite, have to manage things very carefully. And it's possible that because of that, Le Pen could squeak through. But, you know, don't be under any expectations that if she does, she's going to radically change French politics. Whatever she is saying now during the election, I mean, she already looks to me a less formidable figure than she did, say, a year ago.
Haka Nui says, aloha from Hawaii. Keep up the great work. Thanks to you two, many Americans are waking up to the truth and what's going on, both at home and abroad.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And 1 minute, Alexander. Summer of 1970 says, good morning from neoliberal-controlled California. USA government does not have the support of the people. Letter Z at the end.
Can I just say, I mean, I've seen the latest polling figures for Biden, and they're terrible. They're getting worse all the time. And I don't think the political elite in the United States has much support from the US, from the American people. I completely agree with Alex. I've been looking at commentaries and things that people are saying. People in the United States have figured this out. In Europe, they
I think
haven't.
so too.
Yeah.
A large population in the United States, a large proportion, they figured this out. Yeah.
They figured this
maybe
out.
It has to do with Hunter. Maybe it has to do with all of these things and kind of, but they sniffed it out. And I think they're even starting to realize that Zelensky is a complete con.
Yes.
I mean, Americans have, I think they figured this out.
Yes.
I hope. Dimitra is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome. Dimitra. Neil says, thanks for all your insight and balanced information. You guys are great. Thank you, Neil, for that. As Mary says, I read an article yesterday that said the rest of the world needs to start anti-NATO military alliance on the basis of Russia, China, and India. Do you think it is in the works?
Well, there is already an anti-NATO alliance in existence, even though it doesn't give itself that name, and that is the one between China and Russia. And I come back to what I was saying at the start of these programs about all these really strong statements coming out of China over Taiwan. And of course, the strongest statement of all was these massive exercises that the Chinese launched in and around Taiwan and the East China Sea. If you don't think that the Russians and the Chinese coordinate and talk with each other all the time, then I'm afraid you haven't understood the nature of geopolitics at the moment. But of course, whether other countries and which other countries will be drawn to coalesce around this core, that, of course, is a massive question. And the what I have to say this frankly, the battle lines are being drawn now, and it's dismaying to see how quickly this is all happening. The events are accelerating.
Yeah. Simple Sandman says, are these insane actions by the government, the U.S. to implement the Great Reset? Can't help but feel this is deliberate, considering the intense ties of U.S. politicians to the Chinese regime. It feels like they want world war.
Yeah, I think some people in the U.S. almost do. I don't think they believe that it will result in, nuclear exchanges and their own deaths, but I think that they are prepared to go to extraordinary lengths to achieve their geopolitical objectives. And I suspect within the Democratic Party, there is also a conflict between those who still want a good relationship with China for all kinds of reasons, mainly, to be straightforward, personal ones, and the more ideologically minded who want to redraw the world and to subordinate China and Russia again to the globalist project run, which, they're absolutely signed up to.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of comments about the fact that there's so many foreigners fighting, being captured, annihilated in Ukraine at the moment, or trapped in this tilt. I mean, this last week we had a lot of foreign
and this
fighters
morning
from all types of countries get exposed.
Yeah. And this morning, the Russian Ministry of Defense, and this is official from the Russian Ministry of Defense, they claimed that a missile strike destroyed a Polish, what they call a Polish mercenary unit, and
PMCs.
30 Poles, PMCs were killed. Exactly. I mean, can't independently corroborate that, but anyway, undoubtedly there are all these people there. And by the way, we haven't got into this, but over the last couple of hours, there's been a major intensification of the bombing and fighting in Ukraine. I mean, the Russians are hitting far more targets, and they are also hitting very heavily Ukrainian military formations. As I said, people who talk about phase two. Phase two is already underway. We don't yet see vast movements of forces, but in terms of the, tying people down and shelling them and rocket attacks, things like that, it's already going on.
They've been doing phase two now for the last week or two, to be quite honest.
Exactly,
I mean, every night.
Exactly. Every
you
night,
have something like 300 sorties flying, and they're just pummeling everything in and around east to the center east, even to the west of Ukraine.
Absolutely.
I mean, they hit Ivano-Frankivsk, and they took out an oil refinery. Yeah. I did a show in the morning. I think I said an old oil depot, but an oil refinery. And for what I understand, that's it. They don't have any more oil refineries in Ukraine. They've been taken all out.
Yes,
that's what I'm understanding. But
yeah, I absolutely. That's my understanding as well.
Yeah, phase two's been well underway. I mean, we just haven't seen the things on the ground happen in an accelerated way. I mean, it's happening as well. That's also happening. Absolutely. And I think that explains a lot of the distractions that we're seeing and a lot of the attempts to goad Russia into attacking Kiev, which is what they're trying to do. So you're seeing a lot of distractions, and you're seeing the Zelensky regime. They're trying to create some sort of big strike against Kiev. And that's going to serve as a distraction, as well as perhaps another type of a false flag. That's how I'm reading it.
My analysis is, my views are exactly the same.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to say, Alex and I don't always agree. We sometimes have our discussions, but on this issue, I think he's absolutely right. I think that's exactly what I'm absolutely of the same view as Alex has just expressed now.
Ihang 101 says, I wish Alexander would stop treating the CCP Global Times as a news source rather than the state mouthpiece it is. Love this guy's coverage. But this treatment of China, ...
Yeah, I don't treat Global Times as a news source. In fact, many, many times have said in programs where I reference Global Times that I consider it to be a mouthpiece of the CCP. That is the only reason I go to Global Times, by the way, precisely because it is a mouthpiece of the CCP. It's the way I don't necessarily mean that, the CCP is telling us all it wants us to, all its thinking, but it does give us an insight into what it wants the world to think. So that's the only reason I read Global Times. I read it for no other reason. And if you follow my programs carefully, you will see that's why I often make that precise point.
But that goes for all types of publications.
Absolutely.
You read there's the Kremlin readout, there's the White House readout, but there's also, reading, for example, RT. You get, at least in the English language, you get an idea as to what the Kremlin wants people to read, to think, to see. But even in the U.S., you read CNN. Why do you read CNN or go to CNN? Because CNN gives you a window as to what the deep state is up to, or MSNBC is pretty much the mouthpiece of the Democrats, of the DNC. So if you watch MSNBC, you get an understanding what Pelosi and her crew are thinking about. So Fox News, you get an insight into the Mitch McConnells and these guys. So,
and the Daily Telegraph in Britain and the BBC are essentially the voices now of the British government,
of the conservatives,
or any
government.
Yes. Of the Conservative, or the BBC, of any government. The Daily Telegraph of this particular government, because it's Boris. Well, sorry. The Daily Telegraph. Boris Johnson is still on it. Is still, in theory, a journalist there.
And what's the mouthpiece for Labour? Is it the Guardian?
The Guardian.
Okay. So when you read the Guardian, you get an understanding what Labour is thinking.
Absolutely.
Keir Starmer, specifically.
Absolutely. And the Financial Times increasingly has become the European and British voice of the American neocons.
Yeah. I agree with that as well. Absolutely. From Jeffrey, Adolf had a winning strategy, got cocky, overextended, and refused to change course, even after he clearly couldn't win. With this and their merger of corporate and state, our elites seem very similar.
There are certainly striking similarities. I don't want to press this too far because, well, that particular gentleman had his own ideas which are unique to himself. But having said that, I mean, that's an insightful comment, in my opinion.
From Gregory, no sane investor will ever again invest into the U.S. if what Jake Sullivan said at the Economic Club of Washington is implemented by the U.S. Treasury. Worldwide crash. He said it.
Oh, he said it, absolutely.
And they're doing it.
And they're doing it, absolutely. I mean, this lot, I mean, worldwide credibility, they don't believe that they need to be credible because they believe they control everything. That's their mistake.
Yeah. They destroyed the dollar. They destroyed America's credibility from a financial perspective. They destroyed it to these guys. Yes. I mean, they really destroyed it. That's why they have to go all in, to be honest. Absolutely. There is no reverse gear for them now.
No. Exactly right.
FMAC says the Duran is my first choice for news every morning. Good work, gentlemen. Thank you, FMAC, for that. Damien says, are there other nations at risk of CIA regime change?
Sure, there's lots of them. I mean, let's not be under any illusions about this. The only countries that have some protection from regime change, CIA attempted regime change, are those that don't have American embassies.
Or NGOs.
Or NGOs, yeah.
Yeah. Jeremiah says, what do you think of the actual situation of Japan? And what do you think about Japan economic and geopolitical situation in middle to long-term future?
Yeah, this is a very good question, actually, because Japan is potentially a very powerful country. It's a major industrial power. It still has a very big economy. And for a long time after the Second World War, I think it played its cards with great skill. But with every year that passes, it seems to have lost some of that knack. Now, at the moment, the Japanese government, caught in this crisis, has been trying, I think, to play what it probably sees as a clever game. So on the one hand, it's completely signed up to what the US is up to with Russia, even though Japan was working very hard to try and improve relations with Russia until a short while ago. But it's also said that they will continue their energy partnerships with the Russians. I think the reality is that Japan has miscalculated. I think that they will find that they're even more connected to the Americans than they were. I think the Russians have lost interest in Japan. And I think that Japan, with its increasing demographic problems, which are becoming, as I understand it, ever more serious, is at very, very serious risk of seeing itself marginalized even further as a world power, as a potential power. And my big worry is that as the Japanese sense that, China's rise is continuing, that the US, that they are becoming over-dependent on the US, the Japanese influence is falling, that what they're going to do is beef up defense spending and, heaven help us, go for nuclear weapons. I gather that this enormous resistance in Japan to becoming a nuclear weapons state is now diminishing. And I do worry that that may be what the Japanese try to do in order to try and retain relevance. I hope I'm wrong about these things. And if there's any Japanese people watching, please say on the threads what you think.
Lambrini, welcome to the Duran community. And Cornell says, Gonzalo said, if a conflict starts now between China and the US, by this time next year, the dollar and euro will be worthless. What's Alexander's estimation?
No, I don't think they'll be complete. Well, I think the euro could easily be worthless, actually. I don't know about the dollar. I think the dollar will retain will retain a lot of value because it's got the United States, which is a huge country with enormous resources behind it. I don't see the dollar completely disappearing, whatever happens. But certainly, if we are in a conflict situation between the US and China, at a time when we're in a conflict situation between the US and Russia, we're going to see inflation spiral upwards. That's going to undermine the stability of financial systems everywhere. And that, combined with the kind of things that Jake Sullivan has been talking about, has to mean the end of the global primacy of the US dollar. So it would increasingly become just an American currency again. Now, if you want to look beyond the immediate time horizon, maybe, especially if there's a political change in the United States and an economic change, that could actually be a good thing for the United States. But we'll be going through some very difficult times until then.
Real No Sense says China's demographic problems are worse than Japan's. The impact in the next decades is going to be tremendous, in my opinion. And Knowledge Tree says, see Ray Dalio's prediction based on historic patterns about wont likely to replace the dollar. He sees it as inevitable.
Right. Okay. So we have two completely divergent views there. China
kind of connected, kind of not.
Yeah, no, very connected. China has very serious demographic problems. So, and it may be more serious than Japan's, but China starts with an immeasurably bigger population. So, and of course, its industries are still, their productivity is not as great as Japan's. So I would have thought that even if the Chinese are unable to reverse these demographic problems, which is, by the way, quite possible, then still there is enough forward momentum to keep China moving forward, even as Japan falls back. So, eventually, they might both start declining together, but there will be a time interval where China will still be moving forward and Japan will be moving backward. I read in the Financial Times an article I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, that many businesses in Japan are going to start closing because a lot of businesses in Japan are family-based and Japanese people just don't have families anymore. So, there's a restaurateur, for example, who has a restaurant, but he has no one to leave it to. So when he dies, it will close. Things like that have been starting to happen. So, I mean, that's what I mean. I think in China, there is still enough churn for the time being to keep this thing going. Now, about the RMB, I think this is probably right. There are problems with the RMB, which is that it's a controlled currency and it's not yet fully convertible. So it's not an immediate rival to the USD, which is fully convertible and already has a global role. But I'm going to make an observation here, which is that perhaps people don't fully understand this, but the same sort of things were said in the late 19th and early 20th century about the problems the dollar would have displacing sterling. Sterling was this massive internationally traded currency. The USD was much more controlled in those days. It only started to go onto the gold standard properly in the 1890s. So again, it took a while to happen, but of course, eventually it did.
From Association of Socio-Political Heterodoxy, the best way to understand neocons is that they are a death cult. Your thoughts? This is from the KMG show, a channel I recommend to all. Thanks.
There's a lot of truth in this. What they are is, well, I would say it straightforwardly. I mean, they have a kind of messianic urge. They want to achieve, the sort of globally utopian perfect outcome. And because they're so invested in that, if they can't achieve it, well, the very great danger is that they'll basically want everything else to fail as well. If they fail, they will want everyone else to fail too. That is always the danger with people with that kind of mindset. And a death cult, well, if you want everybody to fail, that's not such a huge difference from wanting everybody to. Anyway, I don't want to finish the sentence because I don't want, especially on Good Friday, or the Western Good Friday, to end in such particularly dark notes.
Yeah. Whenever you talk about neocons, it's hard to avoid dark.
It certainly
notes.
is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lord Justcott says, now more than ever, we must all organize to become a non-nuclear world through treaties. If we don't, nuclear war is inevitable eventually, and probably within our lifetimes.
I'm afraid you may very well be right. I have to say the first part of it, a nuclear-free world, is going to be very difficult to achieve, and it's becoming more difficult, if only because countries are starting to say to themselves, we need nuclear weapons to protect ourselves from the neocons. I mean, bear that in mind.
That's exactly right. And you know what? You can't really blame them, can you?
No, of course you can't.
I mean, I'm just trying to be objective. Can you blame a country for saying, you know what, if I have to avoid regime change, then I better nuke up?
Yeah.
I mean, look at North Korea, for example. What saved North Korea and what did Gaddafi in?
Yeah. Well, the North Koreans themselves have made precisely that point, and they made precisely that comparison. When Gaddafi was killed, they said, he gave up his nuclear weapons, and look where he is.
Then, of course, you have Pakistan, which is a nuclear power, but they're controlling the military. They're actually controlling the forces that have the codes.
It's still an incredibly dangerous game. Of course, I should quickly correct what I just said. Gaddafi didn't, of course, have nuclear weapons, but he gave up his nuclear program.
And he gave up his chemical or bio, I think, as well.
All of that too.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a dog across the street which is barking like crazy. So if you guys hear that dog, it's not me. This
is a residential and occupational hazard.
Yeah, always and always at this time.
World.
This dog always at this time. He's barking or she's barking. I don't know. I don't know what gets him or her so riled up at this time. But anyway, let's see. Borkan says, have a great Easter, brothers, Alex and Alexander, and to everyone who celebrates it. Please keep it up and please say hi to Lyra. Have a wonderful Good Friday. You guys are awesome.
Thank you very much.
Borkan. And let's see. From RD Doctor says, is the Marxist theory of imperialism useful here?
Yeah, I think it is. Bear in mind that it's largely based on a non-Marxist who was I think his name was Hobson. I've got his book somewhere. He was a British anti-imperialist, liberal, by the way. I mean, this is where we're entering into another ideological world, because 19th century British liberals were often anti-imperialists. I'm not going to go into a discussion of this because this is a complicated topic, but he actually wrote a very famous book called Imperialism, which Lenin read, and Lenin was very interested in it, and he then wrote his book on imperialism. And what is often called Marxist interpretations of imperialism tend to be based on Lenin's. So, you know, but the ultimate antecedent is, as I said, this book by Hobson.
All right, here's a question. Well, Putin invaded his next door neighbor, stands for all the same values as American neocons. How do you answer that?
No, I don't. I really don't think so. I mean, I think the point about neocons is, first of all, I mean, they have a global approach to war. They want to be, I mean, they're not interested in, you know, what's going on just in America's immediate neighborhood. I mean, they don't take a real politic position. But the thing to always fundamentally understand about neocons is it's an ideological movement. It wants to expand their particular ideological frame, which they want to use the power of the United States to do. Putin's response to the situation in Ukraine, which he has justified on strictly national security grounds and feelings of kinship connection to the people of the Donbass who are Russians, on the contrary, has been justified on exclusively realpolitik sort of basis. In other words, it's protecting Russia, it's protecting Russian speakers. It's absolutely not about promoting what the neocons call democracy in every place. Putin's policies are entirely conventionally classical. It's the kind of thing that many countries have done in history as they've acted to protect what they see as their vital interests.
All right. Next week, we're going to probably have, no, definitely we're going to organize a show with Robert Barnes, and we're going to talk about the legal justification for Russia's actions in Ukraine. Yeah. Real quick, Alexander, what is, in your opinion, your objective opinion, what is the legal justifications that Russia is using vis-a-vis this conflict?
I mean, they provided, I mean, it's actually there in the UN Charter that they see a threat to themselves and they've taken action to prevent that threat. And there is, I can't remember the exact article in the UN Charter, but that is where it is actually set out that they see this. There's a specific legal article which says that if a country perceives itself in danger as being threatened, then it is in a position to justifiably act in order in its own self-protection. So I think the next question someone's going to ask you is a good discussion to have with.
Yeah, we'll do it, but real quick, the next, and we'll have an in-depth discussion next week about this with Mr. Barnes. But the next question someone will ask you is, well, Ukraine wasn't a direct threat to
but of course, the Russians insist that it was. Now, you can argue that. But then, of course, that gets into a discussion about what was actually going on factually on the ground in Ukraine. Ukraine continues to insist Crimea is part of Ukraine and that they're prepared to launch attacks upon that. And, of course, they were also attacking Donbass in violation of the Minsk agreements, which, remember, the Minsk agreement was codified under a resolution of the UN Security Council. So Ukraine was under a legal obligation to perform the Minsk agreement, and Russia is a guarantor of it. I mean, the Russians certainly have a legal case. Let me put it like this.
Right. It's not without legal standing or precedent. If you also say Kosovo,
it's got
or
ample.
Something, yeah.
It's got ample precedent, and it's got legal standing too. Because when you talk about international law, you've always got to be careful, because ultimately international law doesn't have a system, a well-developed system of courts and enforcers that can give you, complete clarity on what every part means. But the Russians have actually provided details. They've actually, when Putin made the decision, he actually specifically quoted various the relevant article in the UN Charter, which he said justified what he was doing and what Russia was doing. And, his legal argument, remember he's a lawyer, his legal argument is certainly one that has legal standing.
Article 51 of the UN Charter.
Article 51, there you go. Somebody's
a couple people put it on there. Yeah. Thank you for that, everybody. From Amarit, some strikes of Zircon, Avangard, and Kizmal are enough to nullify American aircraft carrier fleets. As Shoigu said, Russia doesn't need aircraft carriers, but weapons to sink them.
I think that's probably true, and that may create a revolution in military affairs. Now, of course, what we don't know is whether there's been any discussions. I mean, if we're looking for a crisis in the Pacific, whether the Russians could be providing any of those weapons to China. Remember that story a couple of weeks ago about China providing weapons to Russia? We were very skeptical about it, and it's turned out that it was utter BS, and the US knew it was BS when it was circulating it. Well, it seems to me that
the reverse.
Weapon supplies in the opposite direction from Russia to China are a much more serious threat and possibility.
Exactly. I'm thinking the reverse is happening or might be happening if things really escalate in the Pacific. So exactly right. Let's see. Possum Power, thank you for that super sticker. Tariq, thank you for that super sticker. And Sidebook VR says, Americans compare the U.S. to Rome, but will it end up more close to the Delian League, Russia and China being Sparta and Persia?
Interesting. Okay, the Delian League, by the way, was the alliance of states that was put together by Athens in the 5th century, and which was eventually defeated by Sparta in the long Peloponnesian War. And of course, in my opinion, what I still consider to be the greatest work of history ever written by Thucydides and his account of the, shall we say, the first half of that war, because he died before he could bring it to its full conclusion. So I do see some of the parallels, but always let's never take these parallels too far. I've never, by the way, bought into this America as Rome type thinking, and I think that people who do America a great disservice. As I said previously, and I'm going to say it again, America was created for peace. It was not created for war. Rome, by contrast, was a martial society created for war because of its location in the Italian peninsula, surrounded by other military states that it had to compete against. So these are profoundly different societies, profoundly different mindsets. And I'm afraid those people who want the United States to conceive of itself as a sort of revived Rome don't understand American history. America, to use Latin, is sui generis. It is of itself. It is unique. That has been its greatness.
Yeah, whenever you say that, because you've said it in past shows, there's always I look at the chat and sometimes the comments after the show, whenever you say that, and I agree with you, it was because I think what you want to say is kind of a clarification on your words, is the U.S. was created to avoid entanglements and war, because the pushback that you always get is, well, how do you explain the fact that America has been at war in one form or another for so long? I mean, I think the stats are like maybe 4 or 5 years. It wasn't some sort of entanglement. How do you?
I mean,
how do you push back on that?
This is what the point I'm trying to make is that this was what the original founders intended the United States to be. I mean, I should say, when they talk about peace, and I want to make this very clear, I mean, they talked about the United States existing within the American continent.
You're talking about the founders.
The founders, the people, okay. The people who drew it up, people like Madison, Hamilton, those sorts of people. That was their conception of the United States. They certainly did not want the United States to want to become a kind of, fortress, military state, sending armies around the world, invading other countries. I mean, it wasn't just John Quincy Adams, by the way, with his famous statement about, America not
going out looking for monsters to slay, lest it become a monster itself. If you're familiar, as I used to be, I used to study this, with early American literature and thinking. It was very much that the United States would create a republic on the American continent. It would not be contaminated by the monarchical and militaristic traditions of old Europe. America would turn its face away from that, look away from that. It would concentrate on building itself, and it would prioritize itself and the American people and economy as its ultimate objective, so as to give them a better life. And to the extent that the United States involved itself in the affairs of other countries, it would do so by way of its example. Yeah. Now, that's a profoundly different
it's very mindset. Yeah, it's very controversial. I mean, I think, know that. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at it, because you talk about the Monroe Doctrine. I saw in the chat. The chat's moving fast, but how do you explain the Monroe Doctrine? How do you explain what happened to Native Americans? I mean,
I know
it's a complicated statement, but I think you are. I think you're just, or at least this is going to be my question to you. You're isolating one instance of you're isolating the founders' vision. Is that correct or no?
Absolutely. And can I just say, I mean, I don't want to idealize the founders. You're talking about Native Americans. I mean, they didn't think about Native Americans. Many of the founders were slave owners. I don't want to make it, to make it seem as if, when they talked about creating a republic, they had a particular demographic in mind. They were not particularly concerned about other demographics, or most of them were not. And so, I'm not, as I said, idealizing them. And if you're talking about the Monroe Doctrine, which was, of course, dates from the 1820s, that may not have meant quite what it eventually came to mean at the time when it was made. What that was all about was not having European colonial empires establish themselves in the Western Hemisphere. Now, of course, that quickly evolved into a further policy of interventionism by the United States across the American Hemisphere. But it was not justified in that way at the time.
Right. Okay. That's probably like a whole nother
it's a vast
whole other history segment.
Can I make a suggestion? Why don't we one day have a program with Robert Burns and perhaps someone else who can argue against us? Because I think it would be a good thing to have a three-cornered discussion on this, on this very issue. Because anyway, I do want again to reiterate, the United States, in my opinion, should not be compared with Rome. Rome and the United States are profoundly different countries. One of the great unfortunate things is, that you get all this classical architecture in the United States. But again, the reason why the Americans went in for classical architecture was because it was seen as republican and democratic, as compared with the sort of Gothic architecture, which they associated with the Europeans and European monarchies. So, always bear these things in mind. And by the way, the reason Americans spell some words differently from the way the British do, again, was because the Americans, Webster in particular, wanted to make distinctions because he felt that the English spelling had too many classics, too many Roman type sort of elements, which he wanted to get away from. He wanted to make American spelling closer to what he saw as the popular originals. So there's an awful lot to discuss here. It's a huge topic and a fascinating one, and it's one we need to come to eventually.
Yeah, AC Fernandez says hi both from India, and thank you for doing great work. Is there anything happening to Sergei Shoigu? Mainstream Indian media in the morning published a breaking news that he is having a heart attack, and basically they're saying it's not a natural one. Any ideas on this? There's so many rumors around Shoigu, which is natural, I guess, since he's the top.
He's the defense minister. I've heard absolutely nothing about this at all. Obviously, I haven't been following the news all the time, but I've not heard anything like that.
And I mean, until I see some confirmation of this from the Russian media, I just won't believe it.
Yeah. Alan says, Alexandria was Renaissance architecture, revival in Britain.
Yeah,
revival in Britain. Yeah,
I know. I understand. I mean, I understand. But I mean, there's Renaissance classicism, and then there's American classicism, and they're completely different. Again, these are very big topics, which I need to come to.
You're putting Alexandria on the spot.
Let me put it like this: Renaissance classicism is based on Roman ideas. American classicism is actually based on Greek ones. There is you know, there's much to say.
No, you see it in the architecture.
You do see it in the architecture.
You're exactly right. You see it in the American architecture. You go to DC and I think you do get an understanding that it's closer to Greek than anything else. And I'm not saying that just because, but you see it. You see it. Yeah. I think you're right on that. Yeah. Yifan, thank you for that super sticker. K1F says, F8 says, I'm old enough to remember when the left was against war. What happened?
You tell me. I'd love to know. My own guess is they were infiltrated and taken over by all kinds of neocon people. But I mean, if you want to see the most extreme cases, look at the two parties I know best. Well, it's the party I know best, which is the Labour Party, which was historically an anti-imperialist, anti-war party. Not all members, but much of it was. There was always an anti-war left, Labour Party. It's disappeared. They don't exist anymore. You know, there's. I mean, bear in mind, Corbyn, who sometimes speaks out, isn't officially within the Parliamentary Labour Party anymore. He's been thrown out of it. And if you talk about the Greens, well, I remember the Greens in Germany in the 1970s and early 80s when they were led by people like Petra Kelly, who were absolutely an anti-war party now. And today they're the most militaristic of everybody. So, I mean, you know, it's been a complete change, and it's symptomatic of everything else that the left are nowadays. I mean, you know, they love intelligence agencies, for example. They believe in censorship. Things that, you know, the left always used to oppose once upon a time.
Yeah. Any truth to the fact that America almost became a Greek-speaking nation?
Is
that true? The founding fathers were actually considering Greek. There is that.
I've heard that story. I don't know the whole details of it, but you know, could be.
That would have been
rather a challenge, I'd have thought. Even Greeks have problems with Greek, but anyway.
It's tough language. Yeah, it is tough language. Alan says, where is it, Alan? The U.S. also had Gothic revival in architecture in the 19th century, as in Britain.
Yeah, I know they did. I mean, again, you know, we're starting to move further away.
That's just interesting comments to throw out there. How many Kinzhal missiles does Russia have? That's a question.
Who knows?
That's a good question.
It's a state secret. Quite a lot, it would seem. At least they've got far more missiles. I mean, I was reading, I still remember this. I think it was the BBC that said on the 22nd of March that Russia was about to run out of missiles and that they'd be out of missiles within 3 days.
According to the BBC. According to the BBC, they have no more left.
No more left, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that should have ended on the 25th of March. And here we are, and it's in mid-April, and the number of missiles is, you know, intensifying.
Kalio25 says, since we can't use Z, I suggest we call the puppet Zelensky instead. Zelensky. I say Elensky, Kalio25. Yeah, I just take out the Z now. Whenever I speak now, I just take out Z's. Yeah, there's no need for them. Yeah. And sure enough,
masterstroke to use the Latin alphabet for all of these things, you know, Z and B and all this. And I think O, I believe, as well. I mean, as I said before, very low. You know, they should go on doing it before long, and we won't have an alphabet left.
It was all part of Putin's plan. Let's see. And speaking of Z's, we have a message here from Elena Dia, not Diaz, Elena Dia. Shouldn't all the member states vote to admit Finland and Sweden? NATO Article 10.
Absolutely, they have to. And that's one reason why they're going to pull out all the stops to prevent Marine Le Pen winning the election. Because, of course, if she does win the election, based on what she's saying, and I'm not sure that she will do this, but based on what she is saying logically she would vote no to the admission of these two states. What can they permit that to happen?
Yeah, there's a New York Times article saying that the EU is ready to stop the imports of Russian oil once Macron wins.
Yeah, I know. I saw that too.
Yeah. So they must know something. Paul Duncan says, thank you for your analysis. Do you think that Greece or Hungary may move to a neutral position? Greece, no. Hungary?
Greece, no. Possibly.
Possibly,
yeah.
Greece, no.
It depends on what the EU does. If they start imposing sanctions on Hungary, then, of course, Hungary may decide that it has no choice, realistically, but to seek new friends. But, I mean, Greece, no.
FL64 says, thank you, guys. Oxville sends a super sticker. And an unknown poet says, Modi and Biden virtual meeting? Question mark?
Yeah, there was a virtual meeting about a couple of days ago. It went incredibly badly. I mean, it didn't go well at all, by all accounts. But Biden was hectoring Modi to come out, condemn Russia, and Modi refused. And the latest news that I'm getting is that India is now buying more S-400s from Russia, and they're going to go ahead and buy a lot of Russian coal.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Welcome, Les, to the Duran community. And Juha says, I don't think Sweden will join NATO. Depends what Finland does.
I think. Yeah. We'll see. We'll just have to wait and see. I mean, certainly for both of these countries, it would be a major break, for Sweden especially.
Yeah. Brahim Yosef says, how sanctions will affect African countries. We import mostly from China for rice, oil, etc. Meat mostly produced at home. Russia always planning long term. That's why they won't. That's why they won't seize assets.
I think, but that on the last point, I completely agree. They always do play a long game. But in terms of how it will affect Africa, it will affect Africa very badly, because even if African countries don't buy much food from Russia, they are connected to the global market in food. And of course, supply disruptions of wheat are inevitably going to mean that global food prices will rise, as indeed they are doing. And that's inevitably going to affect Africa. And also, if we're talking about food, we need to always remember fertilizer, which is essential to produce food in the kind of quantities we need nowadays. And of course, 40% of that either is produced in Russia or depends on materials that come from Russia and Belarus. And that's being interrupted as well.
Glasser says, what's the name of the video documentary about the conflict in Yugoslavia? Alexander recommended. Hint name of the brand of your headset. I need it for my job. I think your headset, I think they're talking about, but the documentary is Weight of Change.
Yes.
Weight of Change, the documentary about Yugoslavia.
Yes.
I
can't imagine why you'd want to copy my headset. I mean, always replacing it. Actually, that might have been a hint, by the way. Which is
Balkajan says, what I meant is the U.S. has no active military operation at the moment in Europe. An operation against China would be its only real front.
I don't agree with that, because it's making all these commitments to beef up its presence in Europe, and it would have to. So. It would still be committed in Europe in some form, and of course in the Pacific against China, it would be a different thing, because what would the US do? Would it allow China to send troops into Taiwan? Would it interfere? None of us knows.
We might soon find out. Piduo says the same in Poland, pure propaganda. Poland's on the front line with all of this stuff.
Absolutely. My impression of Poland, by the way, is that Poles tend to be extremely, when they divide on this, and I don't want to get the impression that, there's anti-war Poles. Those Poles who are skeptical are totally skeptical to an extreme level. Those who buy into these kind of narratives, and of course at the moment there are far more of those, buy into them totally to an extreme level as well. So it's Poles are more passionate, if you like, in both directions.
Christian says, First World War destroyed Europe, second got it done. Very true. And Arabian Princess says, God bless you all in Jesus Almighty's name.
Thank you.
Super chat, Arabian Princess. Jay Sammy, thank you for a super sticker. And Rich says, Europe is going to be green because all the Italian and German factories are going to come to a standstill. It's a good point.
It is a very good point. And, you know, I said this, we said this before in the program. I mean, never underestimate the fact that if you're talking about closing down heavy industry in Germany, well, the Greens in Germany don't like heavy industry. So don't expect that Habeck and Baerbock and people like that feel exactly the same way about the closure of Siemens that some of us might.
Yeah, they want it to close. Alan says, can we have a coffee break every hour? Yes, Alan. This will not be 5 hours, Alan. Not at all. Sparky says, Putin and Russia are anti-globalist heroes. That's from Sparky.
Well, I think that this is, by the way, this whole issue of this conflict has now settled the question of whether Putin is a globalist or not. He clearly isn't.
Yeah. Neil says, thanks for all your insight and balanced information. You guys are great. Thank you, Neil. AZ Mary says, I read an article yesterday that said the rest of the world needs to start anti-NATO military lines on the basis of Russia and China and India. We read that. Do you think this works? Yes, we answered that question, actually. And Paul says, I am seeing daily flights over my house, Central Kentucky, of very large military equipment, Chinooks, Ospreys, etc. It seems they are moving a lot of equipment from the Midwest to the East Coast.
Oh, wow.
That's very interesting.
It is interesting.
Pine Mamba, thank you for that super sticker. And Dennis Chan says, if Russia lost 300 billion, how much do you think the neocons will gain from China, Taiwan escalation? That's a good point.
It's a very good point. And of course, you know, with these people, I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, there may be ideologues, but they're also very materialistic ideologues. I mean, to say it very
how much?
By the way, ideologues often are. I have no idea. But I mean, you know, again, we're talking about much larger quantities. I mean, 300 billion in terms of China is, well, it's not a small amount, but it's not a huge, it doesn't come close to what the Chinese have. And Chinese assets in the US are huge. Russia has virtually none. I mean, there's a fundamental difference. If the US starts seizing Chinese assets in the US,
the theft of the century.
Well, I mean, bear in mind, there's also massive US assets in China. I mean, that would be quite an event then. I mean, as I said, an economic war between the US and China will dwarf what we're seeing now between the US and Russia.
Living in the Empire of Lies, thank you for that super chat, says, I was a young college-age American when Ronald Reagan gave his evil empire speech, thinking of the divisions in our country and our belligerents abroad, and hearing Putin's Empire of Lies speech, I cannot help but think we are near collapse.
I understand the feeling. By the way, I'm told that the expression Empire of Lies comes from Solzhenitsyn. I don't know this for a fact, but I mean, I don't remember reading it there, but apparently that's where it comes from. Putin was quoting Solzhenitsyn in effect.
He's a fan of Solzhenitsyn, actually.
He is, absolutely, yes.
Big fan, yeah. Edmis Trish says, thoughts on Chubais and other pro-Western elites in Russia being purged. Many also point at Peskov being pro-West as well. Your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, Chubais in effect purged himself because he went to Turkey. But I mean, there's been a major clear out of what you might call the pro-Western liberal people within the Russian elite. Those are who are, you know, people who really believe that Russia should follow a pro-Western orientation. There is another group within Russia which is still there, and these are people like Peskov, who are not, I think, exactly pro-Western in exactly the same way, but who still hanker for some kind of relationship with the West. And they have not been purged. And Peskov is perhaps a good example of them, but you will also find a lot of people like that in the Western academic community, rather the Russian academic community, particularly those who deal with humanities and social sciences.
Nina says, don't be afraid to annihilate that like button and spread it like butter on bread. Oh, that's fantastic,
thank you,
Nina. Great way of putting it. Darren says, Kosminski, does he still factor in decisions?
Kosminski.
I'm
not sure who this person is. This is some Russian person, but I can't think of him at the moment. Sorry.
Darren, just put it in the chat if so you can clarify who it is, and we'll try to answer it.
Yeah.
Back in Life says, Medvedchuk in public, always polished and put together. Photos by Ukrainians show malnourished, downtrodden. He's their captive for a long time, not recently. Yeah. Hope his brain and memory still intact. I agree. He's been a captive from day one, I think.
Absolutely. By the way, I just to say quickly on that particular topic, I noticed there was a program on National Public Radio of all places talking about how physically decrepit he looks.
Maybe they met Kaczynski in Poland, maybe?
Oh, Kaczynski in Poland.
Kaczynski?
Okay.
Kaczynski. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, he's very, if we're talking about him, he's very, very much around. And of course, he's the person who's driving, in a way, Poland's extremely anti-Russian policy. Of course, he believes that the Russians murdered his brother. So he's got a particular personal reason to hate the Russians. He's wrong about that, by the way. This is his brother who died in a plane crash on the way to commemorate the Katyn massacre. I don't think anybody who's looked at the facts really believes that it was a murder attempt. And of course, there was a Polish investigation that decided otherwise. But Kaczynski certainly believes it. And he's certainly there. His position is deputy prime minister, but everybody knows that he's the most powerful figure in the Polish government.
Sorry, I'm just reading a comment on the Telegram chat. That's just crushing me. My God, this guy doesn't like me, Alexander. Jay Hoden, thank you for that super sticker. Ramon, welcome.
Always a good thing to be disliked by somebody.
Yeah.
If you're liked by everybody, then that tells you that you're not doing anything very much.
Yeah. Let's see. Ramon, welcome to the Duran community. Zarael says Russians are fed up with the BS.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I get almost a sense, by the way, that there's a sense of relief amongst some Russians that they're finally hitting back and are able to go against what they see as this empire of lies that has been pushing against them so hard. I don't know how many people have seen these pictures. I don't particularly like to link to them myself, but you do see pictures of Russian troops rolling through Russian villages on the way to the border, and you see all the people coming out in these villages, waving their flags and giving them the flags and cheering them on. So I mean, there is a lot of this going on in Russia now.
Yeah, that is true. You do see that.
Yeah.
And you're seeing flags being put up in Kherson and in these places.
Absolutely.
As well.
Well, indeed.
It's not going back. It is not going back.
And increasingly in Kharkiv region as well now, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah, outside on the outskirts. Yeah, you're seeing it.
And, people coming out again onto the sides of the roads as the Russian convoys pass and waving Russian flags and things. So.
Andre, thank you for that super sticker. Yeah, these places are not going to be given back. No doubt about it. Chris says, where is it here? U.S. likes to cosplay as a neo-British empire while the UK lives vicariously through it. As an American, I can confirm British hold our culture is strong, but it's not all negative. It is subconscious.
I completely agree with every point there. And I think that's an extremely correct analysis of the relationship. The British vicariously remain a great power through the United States, and the United States continues to be heavily influenced by Britain, and a lot of it isn't British machinations. It's something that the Americans have taken, some American elites have taken on themselves. And living in Britain, I can see why. I mean, if you're looking at the sort of lifestyle of the British elites, it is extremely attractive.
Yanni, thank you for that super sticker. Orama, thank you for that super sticker. Let's see here. Chris, thank you for that super chat. Mr. Huff and Puff says, Sergei Glaziev says a new monetary system would allow global South to default on all its Western debt. What would the consequences of this be?
Well,
he's an interesting character.
He is a very interesting character. What he's calling for is a complete economic monetary revolution. And of course, he has a very clear vision of how he wants to, to take Russia. And undoubtedly his influence is growing in Russia. And he is somebody who does identify Russia very much as a country that ought to be aligning itself with the global South, with China, with all of these countries, and ought to be leading Russia, ought to be leading much of the world in opposition to the West and all those things. I would make one point about Glaziev, which I think a lot of people don't understand. Many of the people who like Glaziev in the abstract don't always read what he says, and are also people, for example, who are very critical of the US for the way in which it engages in money emission and has fiat currencies. Glaziev is a massive supporter of fiat currencies. He also wants to see Russia going down the path of greater money emission. Of course, he wants to do it, or so he says, for a different purpose. He wants to create money and then funnel it into what he says is productive investment in industries, as opposed to what he says is misuse by the US of fiat currencies by funneling them into assets and stocks and private things and that sort of thing. But I have to say that, that then begs the question of, if you're going to use money in that kind of way, as Glaziev does, how do you know what is productive and what isn't? So that's not to say that, I don't find him a very interesting man, and many of his economic ideas very, very interesting. But as I said, I think people who build him up as a kind of hero need to understand a little better what some of his ideas are, and to understand how they relate to other things that they themselves believe.
Yeah. Violin Merchant says someone was projecting a Ukraine flag on the Russian embassy in DC the other day, as if the ambassador was even there to feel offended.
Exactly. Yeah. I heard about this. I didn't see it, but I heard about this. It was in the British media as well, by the way. It was all done as if this was some great win. These
are just media. These are soft power victories.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yes.
It doesn't. It's silly because it doesn't. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't change the reality of what's happening on the ground.
Exactly.
Zionic 8, thank you for that super sticker. Little Dog says, this seizing of Russian assets and then declaring default by Russia seems to be waking up some more in the U.S. It's absurd and showing insanity of U.S. leaders.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's good to hear, because it should do.
Yeah. Aaron Raze says, any food shortages in Greece? Not when I was there, and I'm not seeing them here yet. Yes, no. But there's definitely price increases.
Yeah. I mean, bear in mind that, if prices of some foods increase, that puts them out of reach of some people. And that is a kind of shortage. I mean, shortages and price, you can either regulate goods by price, or you can see them disappear completely from the shops. The shortages that we saw in the Soviet Union, the reason shops suddenly ran out of so many foodstuffs there was because the Soviet Union had very high inflation. But because prices were fixed, that meant that goods simply disappeared. So you can have inflation by inflating prices, or you can have inflation by goods simply disappearing. In Britain, we have both. I mean, we were talking about sunflower oil. I noticed that there are now other goods, things in shops which are starting to trickle down, for example. I mean, I was finding it difficult to get marmalade, of all things, for example. I don't know why.
Jay Galt says, every developed country having a demographic crisis. Immigrants mask it in the West. Does the new father, Alexander, have any tips?
what can I say? I mean, I don't have tips. Just want to have children. That's all I can. All I can talk about this. I mean, what I will say about this is, of course, I mean, I had children. I'm, a person who, we're very family oriented in my family. Obviously, I think one of the reasons you're seeing demographics pressure downward is that people don't feel as family connected as they might do. I don't want to push this too far, though.
Or economically secure.
Or economically secure as well. That's also true, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, uncertainty plays a big role.
Massive role.
Chris DeBoss says, why couldn't America be friends with Russia and allow them to have their own sphere of influence? What's so bad about a multipolar world? That's a great question.
Very good question. I mean, I think it's a great question. I mean, you have to ask the neocons why. And the neocons believe that there should be one sphere of influence, and they should be the people who operate it. That's their conception, which they believe in.
Yeah. Yeah. When the globalists say you're going to own nothing and be happy, they mean all of us. They're going to own everything. That's the trick. We're going to own everything. You're going to own nothing and be happy, but someone has to own it. And eventually,
exactly,
it's them. They're the ones that are going to own everything.
Exactly.
Archer says, been reading books regarding U.S. coups, illegal wars, and meddling in general. 2 good books, The Jakarta Method and Humanitarian Imperialism. I recommend these highly. Do you guys have any recommendations?
Oh, lots of books that you could read. I'm going to give that a pass and think about this because it's sort of things I read a lot about. Let me come back on this maybe on the occasion of our next live stream.
Okay. Rainy Step says, when is Russia going to take the steel plant? Azovstal.
You mean, I presume you mean Azovstal.
Yeah, Azovstal.
Given that, I mean, there were 2 steel plants. Yeah. There was the Ilyich factory. Ilyich, as I've pointed out, is named after Lenin. Lenin's full name was real name was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov. And of course, he then adopted the name Lenin. But Ilyich is his patronymic, so it refers to Lenin. But anyway, they captured that yesterday. So that just leaves Azovstal. I'm afraid the Russian military don't share their timetables and plans with me, but clearly Azovstal is all that's now left in Mariupol, and I would have thought that they must have a plan for dealing with it. And I presume we'll see what that is over the next few hours or days.
Rob says, thank you for your humble honesty and comprehensive analysis. Given the ongoing persecution of Assange, is it reasonable to expect anything like authentic justice in Western courts?
No. I mean, well, let's be clear about this. I mean, in most cases, there is no political element in it, the vast majority of cases. And there, I suspect, most judges do their job. But there is now, and this is new, this is relatively new. I mean, I can say that because I worked in one of these courts in the Royal Courts of Justice. This is relatively new, where there is now a group of cases where politics are becoming increasingly important and determine outcomes. Now, that never used to exist like that, but it does now.
All right. Rich says, Russian firms like EasyTM, Comterm, Tvestmet, Euromash, Bermash, TMP have been producing the most advanced machinery in metal industries. No analogs.
I'm sure that's true. I mean, again, I think this is a point that people like Jake Sullivan, well, doesn't understand many things. But I don't think when he was talking I remember reading this thing. He was talking about Russia having this one-dimensional economy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, he generally doesn't. And I think the trouble is a lot of Americans don't, at least in the political system.
Yeah, they drink their own Kool-Aid, these guys. And the media. And the media also buys that. They throw that line out there every single time they talk about Russia. And I'm talking Fox News as well. Yeah. If every time Laura Ingraham or Hannity talks about Russia, and Tucker to a small extent, I mean, they always say its economy is the size of Delaware. It's a gas station masquerading as a country. They always say it over and over again.
If it was that unimportant,
that's why they're in this mess.
Well, that's why we're in this mess. I mean, why would global inflation be taking off on the scale that it is if it was an economy the size of Delaware?
Yeah. Jahinger says, for the sake of humanity and the world, will the U.S. ever reform or made to reform? Hope Americans can rein in the madness of their controllers.
I think there's more chance of it in the United States than there is in Europe, and that's all I think I can realistically say. Whether the US will do it is another question. Whether the American people will do it or can do it is another question. But to the extent that we could see a change, a shift of position, it would have to be in the US, because it's not for the moment coming in Europe.
The US had it. It was called America First.
Absolutely.
Just a couple of years ago.
Yes. Well, indeed. Yes.
Yeah. Yoav, thank you for that super chat. And Dushyant says, have you seen the Indian EAM's reply to the U.S. press regarding India's oil purchases from Russia in rebuttal to USA's new human rights issue in India?
Yes, I think I have seen this. And I really do think that this brief bromance between India and the US is coming to an end. Bear in mind that Modi leads a party which historically has been perceived around the world as pro-Western. I mean, Congress was the anti-Western party in India, and what is now the BJP, it's gone through various different iterations, was the pro-Western party in India. And my impression is that Indians are right across the board, apart from, as I said, some elements of the business community in Mumbai, Indians across the board are now becoming deeply disillusioned with the US. They find that it's not prepared to treat India as a partner, but always has this sense that it must be superior and dictate outcomes to India. And I think Indians, sensing, the size and power of their country, find that unacceptable.
Yeah. Chris says, I agree. Neocons won't ever retreat from East Europe.
No.
No chance.
Retreat is not in their book. I mean, that's not what they do.
Michael, thank you for that super chat. Lava Javalava says, media says Chernobyl was missing radioactive materials after the Russian unoccupation. Will there be a chance for a dirty bomb for the West?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why the West would need a dirty bomb when they've got all the nuclear materials and weapon systems that they could. Oh, I see. You mean a kind of fake flag? False flag.
Yes, a false flag. Yeah, I mean, the material ending up in or the material ending up in terrorist hands or something like that.
Oh no, okay. So I take it back. I take back completely the point you're making. Yes, I'm afraid I do. I do think there is such a potential. I'm not saying it's going to happen, mind, and of course, if it does, we will at the Duran be looking at it, and we'll be to the. And we'll be analysing it, but I do think the potential for such a thing is there. I mean, William Burns, the CIA director, was actually floating the possibility of Russia using low-grade nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Why would he do that? There's no reason for the Russians to do a thing like this. But why would that possibility even be discussed in the US?
Yeah, I agree. Robs says, do you think the Russians began preparation in 2014 for this war? If so, they likely have plenty of weapons and supply.
Well, of course they did. There's no question about it. The Russians immediately after the events of 2014 began to recalibrate a lot of things that were within their military, within their society, within their economy, in preparation for the conflict that they knew would come. I don't think they'd fully completed in their own minds all of their preparations. I think they were still planning to do more things. But I think they felt at the start of this year that they'd been maneuvered into a position where, as they said, they had nowhere to retreat to, and they had to make a stand. And this is the stand that we're seeing.
Yeah. 1 second. Alex, is it true that Zelensky is a cokehead? That's what they say.
That's what they say.
All joking aside. No,
absolutely.
That is his reputation. I mean, I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. But
same here. I mean, I can't comment. I can't say more than that.
Yeah. But that's before all of this broke out too. It has to be stated. This
absolutely, yes.
Go floating around before any of this.
Absolutely. You know, bear in mind, you know, I don't want to be overly. I don't want to be too judgmental, but I mean, well, not judgmental, but I mean, he comes from a milieu acting, the acting world, where you know that isn't that that is that rare. Exactly. Yeah.
He's a superstar. Yeah. He's like a Hollywood superstar there. Yeah. How dependent on the U.S. is India's economy? If they take a stronger stance, they may be affected heavily.
They would be affected heavily, and that's why they're balancing their position so carefully. But then, you know, again, it's a vast continental economy. Its primary problems are raw materials. So yes, India would be affected, but it would not be existential for them. There's also a fundamental difference, which is that, of course, that India is not a massive manufacturing exporter in the way that China is. Last time I looked, which was some time ago, in fairness, India ran a deficit, you know, a trade deficit. So, you know, if its trade with the US was cut off, it would be very problematic for them. But they could keep it going, provided they had the, you know, the natural resources, the oil, the food, all of that still coming to them. And that doesn't come from the US.
Yeah. Do you believe in the capture of the U.S. general in Mariupol? True or fake news?
I think it's more probably fake news. I mean, that's
fake.
I mean, I think if it had happened, we'd have had completely different signals from virtually every side.
Yeah. It's just interesting that he hasn't popped up anywhere. That's the one part that kind of gets me.
I know. That's the only reason I have slight doubts. But on balance, I do think it's fake news.
Okay. From Trung Tran says, regarding SEA in this upcoming conflict, I am wondering about your thoughts on Vietnamese and Indonesian stance. What are the best positions for Southeast Asia?
Well, I think ASEAN, which of course includes those two countries, Vietnam and Indonesia, is staying out of this war, which in effect means they're aligning a bit with Russia. I think Vietnam would, just like India, would be extremely unwilling to change its stance on Russia. Russia is its long-standing friend. The Russians were supported Vietnam throughout the Vietnam War. They supported Vietnam in the period after the Vietnam War, when Vietnam was in confrontation with the US and China. There's very deep, long-standing links between Vietnam and Russia. I don't think the Vietnamese would be prepared to compromise on those. Indonesia is different, and Indonesia is like another country. It's not a great power, but it's starting to, you know, edge up. It's becoming more powerful. It's got history with the US. I don't think it would want to change its policy and come down as an opponent of the Russians or take side with the US on this issue. I think that wouldn't be popular in Indonesia.
Hannah, welcome to the Duran community. And Gregory says, what are your thoughts on the involvement of the EU Commission figures, 5 of them in control over the biolabs and research programs in the UK? As an EU citizen, I believe it's pure dynamite.
It is pure dynamite. And, you know, it's fascinating to see how every single part of this story, the media is, the legacy media is working overtime to keep it tamped down, which makes one think that there is something extremely embarrassing there.
You know, the point of it all, though, is that, you know, the Russians, I think they've got a lot of information that they're just going to throw out there week after week. But the point of it is not to create an impact now. I think this is going to come back around medium to long term, 2-3 years. I mean, now this stuff is out there, so people are going to research it. They're gonna save it to their hard drives. They're going to look it over, and this stuff will be used.
Exactly.
2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line. Yeah,
I completely agree. I think that's exactly correct.
Let's see, from Dong Fang says, the better translation of Wang Yi's 100-year statement is changes not seen in centuries. That's a quote. It refers to the West losing its monopoly on modernity for the first time since it first began colonizing the globe. That's part one, as well as the rise of the global South. The term has been in use since 2017 and has nothing to do with the centennial of the CPC. She often uses it during internal and diplomatic meetings.
Thank you very much. Okay, lots of clarifications on this statement because I was generally baffled by it, and I now understand it best. And thank you very much for that, and I'll remember that if I see that expression used again. I was working from an official Chinese translation, by the way, but I completely understand your point, and thank you.
Jeffrey says, someone told me there's nothing more encouraging than hearing Alexander say, I completely agree. I'm curious what Alexander thinks about this claim.
Well, I'm deeply flattered. What more can I say?
Right.
I completely agree.
I completely agree. Good one. Very good one. Rady Steps says, Alex, great job calling out Justin Castro yesterday. Well, yeah. Alexander, it's the hypocrisy of it that I hate, that drives me crazy.
Absolutely.
He was upset about NAZIs during the Freedom Convoy. Yeah. And now there's just so much information coming out that for so many years he was training NAZIs, the military. I mean, it's just, it drives you crazy. It really does.
I know. I completely agree with that. Now, can I just, because obviously we always have to be careful in our choice of words, but I was reading on the BBC about a certain battalion, which is in the Azov-style steelworks. And the BBC was trying to play it down, and it was saying, this force in total only numbers 1,000 men. And yes, it did have some rather strange beliefs, but then it was rolled over into the Ukrainian National Guard. So that isn't actually a problem anymore. Right. And the Guardian said the same, by the way. Now, can I just say, just imagine, just ask yourself how the BBC or the Guardian would be responding if, say, the British Army, as part of its territorial forces, its reserve forces, came across a volunteer battalion made up of people who had those kind of beliefs and took them all into the territorial army, the British territorial army. I mean, what the BBC and the Guardian would be saying then, let me be absolutely clear, would not only be completely different. I mean, it would echo to the rafters, and perhaps rightly so. But because it happens in Ukraine, and because these people are fighting Russians, we rationalize it. We look the other way. And absolutely, Alex, it's absolutely right. It is the hypocrisy of it, the insincerity of it, that really, really sticks in the mouth.
Euro Gabor says the first round of Article 7 discussions against Hungary is scheduled on May 13th. Hungary is ready to block EU's climate initiative in retaliation. God, I love a thorn in the side of the EU. They're going after Hungary so hard. They're so upset that Orban
because
won.
he won an election. I mean, it tells you all you want to know about the EU. I mean, there's an election. I mean, he hasn't done anything since the election. He's supported all the sanctions so far. He's actually done nothing since the election. But no, the moment he wins the election, all the machinery is brought out to bear. Well, I mean, does it surprise you? Of course not. But that tells you so much about the mindset of these people.
What do you think they're going to do if Le Pen wins?
Oh, it'll be on a wholly different scale. I mean, what we saw done to Trump, and remember, France has a huge deep state, enormous deep state. What they did to Trump, they will do to Le Pen multiplied by 3. And the commission in Brussels will be working overtime, and they'll be finding every conceivable tool and device that they could find to undermine her.
Yeah. Let's see. Crown Retro says, are there any ideological differences that neocons have with neolibs in this drive towards war?
No, I don't think there's any at all, actually. I think, to all intents and purposes, those two groups have merged. I mean, the neocons were originally Republicans, or so-called, Rhino-type Republicans, associated with, the Bush-Cheney administration. That was where they got. It was about that time that they started to be called increasingly neocons. The neoliberals are Clinton, Obama people, but essentially the opinions of the two groups are identical nowadays.
Yeah, the neolibs try to hide their lust for war with with idealism. Humanitarian. Yeah, they try.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the neocons are just more,
straightforward about it. Humanitarian interventionism, R2P, and all that. Yeah,
exactly. Freedom Autopsy Report says globalism is ruining Ukraine. Putin is trying to save the Ukrainian culture.
Yeah, I would agree. Actually, I think it's not a bad description. I know many people will be very angry with me for saying that. I don't know to what extent he thinks of himself as saving Ukrainian culture. But then, if I get to be straightforward about this, and Russia and Ukraine and Belarus are part of the East Slavic world, and their cultures are very similar.
Alfredo, welcome to the Duran community. Jorge, Jorge, thank you for the super chat. Darren says, do you think states like Estonia, Latvia will ever be more independent? Could you ever see them leaving NATO and taking a turn against the EU?
I can't see it, not at any foreseeable future. I think they've burnt their bridges, actually. I think they've so antagonized the Russians, and in Lithuania's case, the Chinese, that I don't think they have any realistic choice now but to stick with NATO. And I think that's exactly what they're going to do. Back in, say, 2000, they did have a choice, but I don't think they have it any longer.
Candid says Kagan is anglicized Kaganovich, Lazar Kaganovich, related to Robert Kagan, the husband of Victoria Nuland.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Cornell says nobody talks about the gravity of Europe leaders knowing the truth about the village in Ukraine and acting as they did.
Well, that's true enough.
It served its purpose.
It served its purpose. Yeah.
It served its purpose.
It served its purpose, exactly. And I mean, so one has to say one's hearing a little less about it recently. And the missile strike on the railway station collapsed when the Italian TV station blundered by actually providing us with proper pictures of the missile and its serial number.
Exactly. Freedom Autopsy Report says, what about Moscow's new military cathedral?
Yeah. What about it? I've never been. I don't suppose I ever will. It's huge. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah. Jane, thank you for that super sticker. Hunger, the Dye Merchant says, elections in Lebanon next month. A lot of foreign governments gearing up to throw money behind their client parties. Lebanon is still desperate financially. Yes, we've done many programs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And of course, it will have an effect on the events in Syria too, because Lebanon and Syria are so interconnected with each other. That's a tragic part of the world. Terrible things have been happening. It's attracting less attention at the moment, which is wrong. And we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I'm sorry if I always use this word, wait and see. But in Lebanon, you describe the situation correctly. But at the moment, I'm not quite sure how it's going to turn
out. Pickmaster says that this village outside Kiev is still going on in the Czech media.
Oh, absolutely, and to some extent in the British. But can I just say, as I said, I mean, if you're talking about the kind of saturation attention it was getting in the global media, that has receded.
Yeah.
Can I just say, one of the things that apparently went very badly wrong over the course of that virtual conversation between Modi and Biden is that apparently Modi insisted that there should be an independent investigation.
Biden didn't like that.
No.
If Biden understands what's going on himself, that's a big if. Jay Galt says, U.S. is Carthage, complete with child sacrifice being fashionable in the upper class. We rely on mercenaries, not citizen soldiers, and Navy over Army.
I understand the comparison, and this is the contrast. But I mean, I was talking about Rome. That I think that it's wrong to compare America to Rome, and a disservice to the U.S. itself. And Carthage, well, there are lots of similarities you can find. A mercantile society. It was the richest state in the ancient world when it existed. It did rely on mercenary armies. It was led by a wealthy oligarchy. There's lots of similarities you can push, but personally, I don't like to push these comparisons too far. But certainly, I understand your points, and thank you for making them. So far, no child sacrifices officially in the US. But then, we had
Epstein and all that. So,
Marvel
and reports about what a certain creative artist has been up to as well. The one who's his laptops have been circulating.
Oh yes,
yes.
Because you called him an artist, it kind of threw me off for a second.
I'll be very, very careful what I say at this time.
Marvel 5041: Can Russia seal the Polish and Romanian borders with Ukraine, say with paratroops landing or otherwise?
I'm not going to speculate on what the Russian military eventually intends to do. I would have thought at the moment that their plan is to try not to close the borders entirely, which I think would be incredibly difficult. And I think what you're describing would be a very, very dangerous operation, to put it mildly, a very risky one. I think what they're going to do is grind down the main Ukrainian military force in Donbass. I've been saying this for 6 weeks now, and interrupt communications and the supply of reinforcements there by knocking out railways, roads, that kind of thing. And then once they've dealt with that force, then they can start moving westward, and they can deal with every one of these forces step by step and one by one. I have to say, I gather that the flow of Western weapons to Ukraine actually is starting to ebb, not because of any desire to send, any change of stance, but because the Western powers have run out of the weapons, or running out of the weapon systems that it is easy to send. So they're at the moment scratching their heads, wondering what else they could do. There was a scathing account on a veterans website about the weapon systems that the US is now sending to Ukraine, the M113s and the Mi-17 helicopters and things of that kind, and suggesting that these were not really the kind of weapon systems that Ukraine could usefully use.
Rocky Luck says the slaughter in Armenia continues. What is the origin of this conflict? I read that Stalin reassigned Armenian lands to Azerbaijan. Why was this?
Right. Well, this goes all the way back. This is about Nagorno-Karabakh. This goes all the way back to Soviet nationalist policies in the 1920s and 1930s. Now, I've heard different views about this. One is, and remember, Stalin was a Georgian, so he knew the Caucasus very well, that he wanted to create problems, to continue to create problems between Armenia and Azerbaijan, because he wanted to play the two off against each other. The second is that he had strong connections with Baku, which is the capital of Azerbaijan. He was formerly involved in the underground work against the Tsar's police in Baku amongst the oil workers. And for that reason, he had stronger feelings towards Azerbaijan than he did to Armenia. The third that I've heard is that he didn't trust the Armenians very much, because Georgians supposedly aren't terribly keen on Armenians. There are differences, apparently differences of culture and even religion. I mean, I'm not an expert on this. And that he had suspicions about Armenia. And yet another reason is that it wasn't really so much Stalin's decision, but it was more a consequence of the civil war, that the Red Army, as it marched on Armenia, came through Azerbaijan. Nagorno-Karabakh was one of the first places to fall, and it was as a result attached to Azerbaijan instead of being joined to Armenia. These are complex stories. I don't know what the truth is. I think this requires massive, much more research in the archives than it's probably had. And I'm sure there is an explanation which we don't yet have. What you're saying, though, about the conflict continuing, I'm afraid it is. And I think that the Russians, strangely enough, have not overlooked it. I think they are still trying to broker some kind of a peace, but obviously they are overwhelmingly focused at the moment on the conflict in Ukraine.
Right. Irish Partisan says, will you guys be doing a video on what's happening in the Solomon Islands in South Pacific region? Jeffrey Sachs briefly mentioned it in an interview with CNN. Happy Easter, guys. Happy Easter to you as well. Mr. Irish Partisan, and a great channel as well, which I recommend. We've done a video on this, but we should continue, because
we should continue with it. I mean, obviously, with all that's going on in the Pacific, China, as we spoke about at the start of the program, we really have to. I mean, we can't let this go because, I mean, this is, to be straightforward about, this is a much bigger crisis even than the one we have at the moment, which is big enough.
God help us. D. Autophilius Ilocos says Destiny Manifesto and Monroe Doctrine. Thank you very much for that. Joe Duran, thank you for that. Super chat. Mora, thank you for that super sticker. Della says, USA here. NATO can try to cancel Russia. I'm learning the language and want to see the country that protects its culture. Trust nothing from the Biden administration.
I understand that, and I completely share your feelings. By the way, can I just say, Westerners who end up in Russia overwhelmingly come away with positive impressions. That's my experience.
Absolutely. There's a lot more in common between Americans and Russians than the powers that be want the people to realize.
I know. Yeah.
And when people in the UK went to Russia during the World Cup, the British government tried to propagandize them and tell them how bad it would be. And people in the UK and people in Russia got along really, really well during the World Cup in Russia. But you see, they really ended up liking each other a lot.
Absolutely. And you see, you have all these terrible, you know, there's a TV series at the moment in Britain called Killing Eve. I'm sure lots of people know what I'm referring to, with a, you know, Russian hit woman who does all kinds of things. And there are some scenes in this series which are actually set in Russia. And they don't look at all like Russia. They bear no similarity, resemblance to anywhere in Russia that I've ever seen.
Yeah. 66 Starship Alien says, I would love ANA's views about the UN war crimes that Russia is accused of and have to answer to after the situation in US war crimes in invasions in Iraq and Syria, not allowing citizen refugees to escape, for example.
Yeah, ANA. I'm not sure who ANA.
You.
Us.
You.
Yeah,
Alexander.
Yeah, absolutely. The both of us. Well, I mean, I am profoundly skeptical about all these stories. So it seems is the Pentagon. Given that I am skeptical for good reason, because, you know, they haven't been investigated properly. You know, I think that's all I'm going to say on these specific allegations. I mean, we have had so many wars where the United States, Syria, when I say the United States, the neocons, the people who control the United States, the British, have made all kinds of claims about similar things in Syria, similar things in other places. And of course, it was entirely predictable. In fact, it was predicted that sooner or later something similar would be said about the kind of war crimes that were committed or have been alleged to have been committed in Ukraine. And that already makes me very skeptical and very much doubt their credibility. Now, if you're wanting to make comparisons with things that have happened, well, Putin actually was talking about this. He says that he has meetings with Western officials, not web meetings. He has telephone conversations with Western officials. And apparently he said this also to the Chancellor of Austria. And, you know, Chancellor of Austria comes along, talks about all of these things. And he said, look, here's a photo of what happened in Raqqa, in Syria, you know, bombed into pieces. Here's Mosul. Here's all of these other places. Show me in Ukraine anywhere where the same has happened. And he said Putin's response, Putin says that in response, what he basically gets is blank stares.
Yeah. Virgo Rising says, what do you know about American scientists from the laboratory of Merefa testing potentially dangerous biological drugs on patients of the regional clinic psychiatric hospital in the city of Kharkiv? I read this story and the documents are out there. I personally can't comment more, but the Ministry of Defense put these documents out there.
Yes. I mean, I come back to exactly what Alex said. This is going to take a long time to unravel. People will be researching it. People around the world will be researching it. If there's anything there like that, it will come out now. And this is a long burn. It will, but, you know, it's a long burn that could eventually lead to a big scandal. Exactly. Yeah, but it's a long burn.
Think of the Hunter's laptop was a long burn.
Well, absolutely.
2.5 years. And now we're finally starting to get a lot of it out there.
Yes.
So
yes. By the way, I mean, just to say, I mean, you know, a lot of people suffered for, you know, because they came out, said true things about Hunter's laptop. And I haven't seen anybody at the moment come along and say those people were right and should be, they deserve an apology and should be reinstated in some ways.
And they never will.
And they never will.
Yeah. Neurosurgery Highland says, Moskva a directed energy weapon like in 9/11? Question mark.
No, I don't think so. Who knows? Look, I'm not going to speculate more about Moskva. As we discussed yesterday in a program that we did, Alex and I think that one is up. I think the balance of probability is that this was an internal problem. And the reason I say that is because the Pentagon says they don't know anything about any Ukrainian missile strikes. And I have to say, if there was a Ukrainian missile strike, I presume the Pentagon would know. That's basically my thinking about this. As for why it sank, I'm going to give my own guess, and I want to stress I think this is a guess. I think the Russians scuttled it.
Yeah, well, right, sank after they were towing it. Yeah,
although they were
I think they scuttled it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think they scuttled it. Yeah,
that I agree with. Yeah. TG says, as a Texan, I wish I were independent. Do you guys know why the DC elite hate Russia, Putin so much? It feels like they sold more books about anti-Putin than the Bible.
Oh, they're obsessed with Putin. I mean, he's absolutely got under their skin for all kinds of reasons. I think the reason is because Russia is so important to their great game. And, you know, when Putin came along and told them to go and leave and started reorganizing Russia, I mean, he got in the way of their plans and they can't forgive him for this. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. The other thing is, and I think there is another factor, which is, of course, he stands for a certain type of conservatism, social conservatism, which is unacceptable to many of these people nowadays.
Yeah, he ruined their game.
Yeah.
From Rob Simmer, do you think the Russians began Oh no, I read that one. I read that one already. I'm sorry. Is the West? This is the one I want. The 8 pill. Is the West behind the Shanghai lockdown, or is it Western powers? Why would she do something so brutal?
Yeah, because I mean, you know, let's not idealize China either. Remember, the whole lockdown thing began in China. They started doing this in a ferocious way, and of course, they're continuing to do it in a ferocious way. Now, in one respect, it's a way of demonstrating control, the kind of control the Chinese government has over its population. But I'm going to also say something. I think that whatever benefits China was getting from it before, whatever those were, I think that's really run its course now. And I think all that the Chinese are doing is that they're trapping themselves into a period of permanent lockdowns. They're all going to start in all sorts of places and disrupting their own economy. I think it's a policy that has failed.
Yeah, the zero lockdown policies failed. Yeah, I agree. Fellow Athelward said, I dream to see rainbow flags burned to the ashes to end the degenerate era. When will we see Western nations change their flags to globalist ones?
Good question. I hope never. Yeah. That's all I can say.
Less is more. Welcome to the Duran community. Moro says, Happy Easter to you both. Happy Easter. Moro. Juha says, I don't think Sweden will join NATO. Yes, I think we read that one. Rich says, Russia and Rome are two civilizations that have been demonized by Anglo-American media, be it in Hollywood, politics, games, etc.
Yeah. You know, if you want to really push comparisons between a country and Rome, you could actually say that Russia has more of the sort of Roman traditions than certainly any other European country has. And again, a lot of the Russian architecture, if you go to places like Moscow and even more St. Petersburg, does have a sort of Roman type feel. But anyway, I understand the point. It's an insightful one.
DZ Jerica says, who speaks for the earth? Carl Sagan must be turning in his grave.
I wish he was here. He was such a voice of reason. I loved his programs.
Yeah. Maris, welcome to the Duran community. Toy Chung, thank you for that super chat. Doug Swit, thank you for that super sticker. Otno says, my anti-inflationary contribution. Keep up the good work. I have no idea how you can physically manage, but please keep doing it. Many thanks.
Well, we do it because we are supported by you.
Thank you very much for that, Otno Sens. And John Flanders says, thank you for all you do. Thank you, John Flanders, for that. And Life of Brian says, are the neocons just a front for intelligence services? It's hard to tease the hierarchy of the swamp.
You know, it's very difficult to know where one group begins, the neocons, and the other group, the intelligence services, end. For what it's worth, I think what's happened is not that the intelligence services run the neocons, but if anything, the other way around, that the neocons have managed to infiltrate their thinking into the intelligence services and have achieved capture over them. And quite when that happened, I am not sure. It's a very interesting discussion. And a good person to discuss it with would be Scott Ritter, who was, of course, an intelligence officer, and Ray McGovern, who's another one too. And maybe we'll have them both on our program to talk about that very topic.
Let's try to do it. Tina Hutchins, thank you for that super sticker. Heyman says, to create a fair world order, there must be reasonable borders that aren't drawn for the purpose of divide et imperia. Can Indian subcontinent, Africa, and Asia redraw their borders into super states?
Who knows? But it'll be a decision that those countries and their peoples will have to make. I mean, it'll be a difficult one to achieve something like that. And as I said, it can only be done by the people of these places themselves. I would have thought India is big enough, actually. And I would have thought that if you're talking about India specifically, if you're talking about India expanding to reabsorb places like Pakistan, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, well, that would be an unwise thing for India to want to do.
Jules D says, Canada is sending troops to a peacekeeping mission to Poland. Any idea what the real motive is behind that?
Peacekeeping mission in Poland. I wasn't aware that Poland was in any period of civil conflict. Exactly. So what exactly is this peacekeeping mission? I think when you talk about Trudeau, always bear in mind that one word, the words always mean the opposite of what they used to mean. So when he talks about a peacekeeping mission to Poland, it sounds more like a war keeping mission to me. I presume that they're there basically to train Ukrainians.
Yeah, exactly. Darren says, any thoughts on Kim.com predicting more leaks of the Biden laptop next week?
Well, we'll wait and see. I lots of rumors about that flying around. Brilliant article, very interesting article by Jonathan Turley, by the way, saying that already there is enough out there, basically, to justify a FARA indictment.
Dimitra K says Zelensky is more like Lewinsky. Yes, very true. Lady Cosmica says, I love that clockwork design behind you, Alex. Just saying. Thank you very much for that, Lady Cosmica. And Darren says, Kolomoisky, the Ukraine oligarch, Zelensky's backer of his TV and political career, or put another way, is there still internal players influencing Zelensky? Kolomoisky, yes.
Yes, of course there are. And of course he does. Of course, they're all doing it now from outside Ukraine because that's where they are. But bear in mind, Kolomoisky is, I think he's in Switzerland, but he's based or Israel or even Cyprus some of the time. I'm sure he's pulling his own levers in Ukraine. And of course, the other big figure now is Rinat Akhmetov, the big oligarch formerly of the Donbass, the steel magnate. And of course, he's the owner of Azovstal. So, of course, if a certain battalion entrenched itself there and built tunnels and bunkers and all those sort of things, presumably they did so with his knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeff, thank you for that super sticker. TJ Ilhan says, changing tack, I live in Salisbury. What was truly behind the Novichok episode? Novichok.
I don't know. Well, I'm going to say something straight away. Scribbles, yes. I'm going to say something straight away. First of all, this is a terrible affair, the way it's been handled. I mean, what has happened to these two people? Where are they? Why have we been denied all knowledge about them? That in itself, I find extremely sinister and so unlike the way Britain used to work. Secondly, the conduct of this investigation has been terrible right from the start. going all the way back to Theresa May, who was then Prime Minister, standing up in the House of Commons and identifying who she said the culprit was before any investigation had even started. And thirdly, if you look at the facts of the case, it seems to me that it fell apart. The official theory, well, it didn't completely fall apart, but it was severely undermined when another bottle with this substance suddenly appeared weeks after these alleged attacks. And it's proved very, very difficult to reconcile the discovery of that bottle with the accepted narrative.
Tim Gibson says, Patrick Lancaster had a very good video today. More evidence of Azov war crimes. Yes, that was an incredible video.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it.
Check it out. Incredible video. Yeah, completely agree with you there.
Heroic man.
Yes, absolutely. Elena Dia says, can you recommend where one can get a comprehensive understanding about the Chechens and the Chechen War?
Gordon Hahn has written books about this. He's a former US, I think he was in the military as well, but he's an academic, and he's written some really good books on the war in the Caucasus. And I think there's a fair amount of literature out there as well, which you could look into. But I would start with Gordon Hahn. That's Hahn.
Yeah. Antardas, 2 parts, says, being in intelligence schooling for months has made me understand how U.S. intelligence community is now unreliable, in many cases, and arrogant when they work for the alphabet agencies later in life. I might also add that many in intelligence schools will become a part of the globalists. You can see that from a mile away when you ask them questions.
Well, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think what happened. You could just about say that the Iraq debacle was because of outside pressure put on the internal intelligence agencies by the administration. But you couldn't say that about Russiagate. Russiagate came from within the intelligence community itself, and that was extremely disturbing. And now we have this extraordinary piece, I think it was on NBC, that a lot of the things that they publish are straightforwardly untrue, and they know it, that they're actually putting out there to the American people things about the war in Ukraine that they know are wrong, that they know are false, like the whole story about Chinese arms supplies to Russia, that they knew that it had no real basis, and yet they just go out pumping this kind of thing. I mean, I never imagined that could happen. And I come back to this. Who are they trying to mislead? The Chinese? The Russians? Obviously not with a story like that. They're trying to mislead us.
Yeah, and the media covers for them.
And the media
That's the worst part about it.
The media covers for them. Not only covers for them. I mean, they're so confident that they come out and brag about it.
Yeah. Neurosurgery Highland says May 9th may require a new Putin push for a victory, may then prompt NATO escalation.
Possibly. I mean, bear in mind, there is a push underway now. I mean, I haven't followed the absolutely latest up-to-date news, but as we discussed at the start of the program, there has been an intensification over the last couple of hours in the fighting and the bombing in Ukraine. And this comes after a week of pretty intense fighting and bombing already.
Yeah. Indigo Jones says, Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone recommended your channel after the interview with Colonel McGregor. Max also laments the loss of an anti-war left. Yes, I agree with Max.
Yeah. So do
I. Where did the anti-war left? Where did the liberal left go? A traditional liberal. Where did that go?
Well, I know quite. Yeah, absolutely. Where have all the flowers gone? Where did the liberals go? Where did the left go? Goodness knows.
Andres says, thanks. Ray West, thank you for that super chat. Summer of 1970 says, will gold back the ruble, and what effect will that have on the price of gold in the future? Any ideas?
Well, I think the first thing to do there is to organise another programme with Tom Longo, because he's in a much better position to answer all this than either of us is. Yes. At the moment, the ruble has been pretty stable as far as I can tell. I haven't checked it today, but I gather it's been. And I think that the fact that there is this gold underpinning is plays a role in it. And I suspect that we will probably see gold playing a bigger role too. But Tom is the person to look at, and maybe we should try and get him together for a program.
We exchanged emails to try and get. It's really hard to get the time to organize.
Well, you know, because we're all busy people. I mean, that's another thing to say. We are very, very busy people. So
yeah, well, a lot of it falls on me. My bad. I'm just. It's hard coordinating everything.
Absolutely, I know.
Yeah. All right, Terry, thank you for that super sticker. Ralph, thank you for that super sticker. Chris DeBoss, thank you for that super chat. Message deleted though. Okay, thank you, Chris. Anyway, Tim says, with all this free time, may Alexander please do music literature streams? It would be great enjoyment and value.
I would love to.
Being sarcastic. Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Tim. Mike says, was the Russian threat to strike decision-making centers not actually aimed at NATO types embedded in Ukraine army?
I think it means everything like that. I've had a discussion with Joe Laurier, a Consortium News, and he suggested, and I think he's right, that they will hold back the ultimate thing in case there's a Ukrainian attack on Crimea. And that what really provoked the Russians to make that particular threat was the fact that US intelligence is apparently sharing with Ukraine information about Crimea. So this is what that was to some extent about. But can I just say, the latest military briefing from the Russian Ministry of Defense, they said straightforwardly that, you know, they will escalate attacks on Kiev. And there was an attack on Kiev last night on an industrial facility near Kiev. You know, the more strikes are taking place against their own territory. And I think, I'm sure, Alex and I were talking about this, I'm sure, I agree with Alex about this, that there are some people who want to provoke a big Russian strike on Kiev, because this is the latest story that they want to run. You know, Russians doing terrible things. And this is partly what this is all about.
Yeah. Hannah, welcome to the drag community. El Boone says, I'm amazed how the MSM does not talk about Zelensky in the Pandora Papers anymore. What do you guys think about those monies and scandals? Thanks.
Why are you amazed? Wouldn't one be far more properly amazed if they were talking about the Pandora Papers and all of this? After all, I mean, he's now a secular saint and he appears in all the parliaments.
He's like Dr. F now, yeah.
Exactly. You know, standing ovations. I mean, he's JFK and Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln and all of that all rolled into one. So do you really want to stain his name by the Pandora Papers? You know, references to the Pandora Papers and any of that kind of thing? Well, of course, I mean, it's a sordid story, but then, I mean, in that he is absolutely no different from anybody that has any kind of political role in Ukraine whatsoever, or any business role in Ukraine whatsoever. They're far worse people than him.
Ryan B says, have a nice weekend. Have a nice weekend, Ryan B. John says, thanks for all you do. Thank you, John. Random username says, why would Russia give back Ukraine? Sovereign Ukraine equals the same problems all over again. Exactly.
Well, I think lots of people in Russia are making exactly that point.
Exactly. Devin Ball says 25% West and 45% East Germans think we have no democracy. Interesting point.
Interesting.
Stephen, thank you for that.
It's the 25% of West Germans that, you know, I find striking in that number. East Germans, you know, because of their history, you know, one can understand why they would be more cynical. But West Germany was not a cynical country when I first knew it.
Stephen, thank you for that super sticker. Michael, welcome to the Duran community. Editran Traveler says, China and Russia have made investments in relationships in Africa, while the West had not, but see the value. Are they green with envy?
Well, they're not just green with envy. They're determined to uproot these to the extent that they can. There's going to be a lot of conflict in Africa, I'm afraid.
From Ryan, how'd you guys meet and how'd the Duran come about? Found the channel through Viva. Thanks for the news every day.
Well, do you want to say that? Do you want to explain, Alex? I mean, we met in a park in Moscow. Let's put it like that. We met. We had a discussion. We discovered that we had a lot of things and opinions in common. We were primarily talking about Greece and the situation in Greece. And then events came about that we were contacted by a third party who was then trying to bring us together, and we did, and we ended up
park in Moscow.
Park in Moscow.
See, exactly. we were under the directions of Putin.
That's right. It was under directions of Putin. It was nothing like that. It was a social thing essentially. But anyway, and then as I said, some years later, we just came together, and the Duran appeared. Yeah. It's a complicated.
Back when you could still visit Moscow.
Back when you could still visit
joking.
Moscow.
I'm joking with you guys.
Yeah.
Back when you could still.
I don't know, by the way, where the name of the Duran has come from. It was Alex knows that particular secret. I've never had. That's a secret that is kept from everybody, even me.
Carmichael says maybe you guys are spies.
We're very visible. We're too visible to be spies. We're just two guys.
Maybe that's the trick of it all.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in London. Alex is in Greece and Cyprus, and that's all there is to us. I mean, straightforward as that.
I think it was Park Gorkova, if I'm not mistaken.
It was Park Gorkova. It was absolutely Park Gorkova, Gorky Park. Yeah,
it's a beautiful park.
It's a beautiful park.
Yeah.
Yes.
I miss Moscow. I really do.
Yes. By the way, the film doesn't do it justice.
Gorky Park with what's his name?
I can't remember.
Who's the actor in? Do people know in the chat? What's Hurt? Yes. William Hurt? William Hurt?
Yeah, I think so. You sound like that, yes. But as I say, it doesn't do it justice. I mean, it doesn't look like the actual Gorky Park. I know what it looked like in Soviet times, but today it's a beautiful place.
Yeah. The pro-Putin rhetoric here is ridiculous. They won't even admit that Ukraine sank the ship. Ukraine did sink the ship, Alexander, and from what I'm reading, they're sinking every ship like it's a video game.
Yeah.
And Zelensky is preparing his triumphant ride into Red Square.
Yeah, and of course, the Pentagon is obviously controlled by Putin as well, because they're not admitting that it was Ukraine that sank the ship. So, Putin is everywhere; he controls everything.
Well,
Putin,
no, wrong. I have to stop you there. Putin controls everything except the success of the war in Ukraine.
That's true. That's so
true. that's the sorry, I had to cut you off there, but yeah.
No, you're quite right. You're absolutely right.
He controls the United States.
Corrected.
He controls voting in the US. He controls social media in the United States, as long as it's not social media with regards to the war.
Yeah.
He controls the voting in Europe, all of Europe, Austria, France. He controls Le Pen. But when it comes to the war in Ukraine, he's
he
controls nothing.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Nikias, thank you for that super sticker. Senor, thank you for that super chat. Let's see. Karen says, hello, Alex and Alexander. Have you ever thought about doing an in-depth history classes apart from YouTube, perhaps online courses for those of us who'd like to take deep dives into world history?
Well, when we are able to, maybe we will look at those ideas. I mean, I've never been a history teacher, if I can put it like that, and I'm sure there are better people than that than me. But we did do our first history series on the Russian Revolution, which we haven't really finished, by the way. I mean, it got interrupted by these events, and we could perhaps come back to it later. We will come back to it later when we can. And maybe we will do many more things. I mean, we've had lots of plans about things we would like to do with the Duran. But at the moment, as I said, we're two guys and, there's only so many hours in the day. Alex pointed out how difficult it is to get guests and do producer things. So, we'll try and get to all of these things eventually. But at the moment, we are
working flat out on these programs that we're doing now.
The quantum alchemist says Putin controls the entire universe, but for some reason he does not control the war in Ukraine. That's exactly right. Let's see. Zariel says, I know what the Duran means and well-chosen name. That's interesting, Zariel.
That's interesting. Okay.
All right. The Divine Insurgent says, do you think that Russian foreign policy, Dugin, has exacerbated racial divisions in the United States in the past years, or is it the MSM or a combination?
Yeah, I don't think Dugin has had any kind of influence on Russian foreign policy or on Russian domestic policy at all. And can I just say, the thing about Dugin, and I've read some of his pieces, is that he's sometimes very good on analysis, but he's hopeless when it comes to actual practical policies that people can work with. And I think a lot of people anyway in Russia don't really, frankly, have much time for many of his more theoretical ideas either. So I don't think Dugin has much influence at all, if I have to be straightforward about this. I think the problems we have of the nature that you described in the West are unfortunately all entirely of our own making.
Yeah. Let's get ready to rumble. Says after a meeting in the KGB, Alex and Alexander met in the park in Moscow. They exchanged opinion and then exchanged brown envelopes, and the rest is history.
Of course, so true.
Yes,
you've joined all the dots.
That's a great comment. Thank you, man. That's awesome. Borkad says, if Putin could control women, he would control everything. Can he?
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question to ask him, though. Yes. Let's see here. Go Away says, that's not why he killed Edmund Safra. Have on Martin Armstrong to explain.
Yeah.
Martin Armstrong. Actually, yeah, it would be great to have Martin Armstrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Tina, thank you for that super sticker. Let's see. Senhor says, you two are the reasons why I keep my sanity. Thank you for that. Life of Brian says, I suspect the consolidation of the U.S. deep state around one party, increasingly despised, might be a blunder for them. Will this hurt them?
Yes, I think it has. I think a lot of patriotic Americans who are Republicans are very, very, very disillusioned and have become aware of the very fact that there is a deep state. And I think it was a mistake by the deep state to identify so much with one party. But there are structural reasons why it happened. I mean, it is not chance that the deep state and the Clinton Democrats found each other.
Yeah. Bicara says, hey, Alex, to play Leonidas in 300. the beard is getting there. Carol says, missed your history series. Yeah, we've got to get back to the history series.
We do.
Absolutely.
We enjoy doing it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Density says, I hear Elensky's moon base is going to be really impressive.
Oh, it's going to be enormous. It's going to be vast. His space projects are going to be absolutely mind-blowing in scale. I mean, warp speed is definitely on its way.
Yeah, the great Emperor Zelensky. David, thank you for that super sticker. Pavlov, thank you for that super sticker. Steve Kenderton says, Elon Musk will win, or will he win big with buying Twitter?
I'd like to know your views on this, Alex. I should tell you, my wife was asking me about all of this, and I said, this is something I need to talk with Alex about. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to know what you think about this.
I would like to think that, look, Elon Musk is making a very good offer.
Yeah,
he's making a very good offer, and if the board and the management of Twitter, who have a fiduciary duty to look after the best interest of shareholders, if they do their job, then they will sell it. They will agree. But I think Twitter is not in the business, and I've said this for a long time. I don't think social media. Big tech is in the business so much of making money anymore.
Well, I agree.
I mean, yes, it's part of what they do, but I think there's a whole nother part. So I don't know if the deal will go through now. Yes. It should be a slam dunk. If everything was normal, it would be a slam dunk and it would be done and wrapped up. But no, I don't. But either way, Elon Musk, if they don't go for it, then Musk could take, I don't know, not 43 billion, Alexander. He could take 10 billion. 10 million to create a platform and another 9.9 billion to market the hell out of it and destroy, you know, Twitter, and Facebook, and all of them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
You could do it. Or you could invest it in existing.
You could do it. You could do it.
Gab, Minds. So there's all kinds of platforms you could back. Why not?
Yeah.
Skipster says, "Happy Easter." The Duran has a big following with the dive and with the Jackson Hinkle community. Yes. Jackson Hinkle Alexander is someone who's doing really, really good work on Ukraine. We have to get him on as well, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He's been, and he actually, you know, something happened with his Twitch. I heard something happened with his Twitch. They went after him. They went after the guy. They tried to smear him, and they went after him, and because he's doing really good reporting on what's going on in Ukraine, and everyone should support him. Absolutely.
Right.
The channel is called The Dive. Right. And he's doing really good reporting, and they're going after him because he's doing honest reporting.
Gosh, okay.
Yeah. Twitch. I never got into Twitch, so I don't really know how they work. But Doug Fang Shu says, "You may disagree with the method and guiding principles, but the truth is the rest of China wishes for stricter lockdowns in Shanghai. They think Shanghai has a sense of Shanghai exceptionalism." That's an interesting comment.
Yes, I've heard this too, and I heard this. It was explained to me a lot when I was in China, and when I was in Shanghai, that there are lots of, shall we say, the people across China do have particular feelings about Shanghai, which is perhaps unsurprising, and just as people in Britain have about London, and many Americans I know have about New York and San Francisco. A lot of people in China feel the same way about Shanghai. It doesn't surprise me. My overall view, though, is that the reality, even if the reality is that the variant is out there, it's going to spread. Trying to control it through lockdowns is now hopeless, and it is self-defeating. And the sooner even the Chinese government understands that, even the Chinese government doesn't have the power to control it anymore. And the sooner they understand that, the better it will be.
Yeah. Hermes says, "Is Davos pushing for escalation in Ukraine, resulting in a hot war, Russia versus West, as a way of bringing about the Great Reset?"
Well, indeed, yeah. I mean, this is the good question. This is the big, massive question. I mean, we just don't know because we're not party to these discussions. Bear in mind, there is a hot war in Ukraine. I mean, it's going on as we speak. People are dying. People are fighting. There's shelling going on. There's missile strikes. It's just that at the moment, it's been fought by the Russians and the Ukrainians, with some Westerners fighting on the Ukrainian side. We don't know how many. We don't know in what form. We don't know to what extent governments are supporting them. And there's an awful lot we don't know. But if you mean, will the powers that be, the people you call Davos, will they escalate? We don't know. I mean, how risk averse these people are. My great worry is that, there's the Davos crowd, and then the neocons, who obviously they're interconnected, but they're not identical. The problem is more with the neocons, because Davos, the people in Davos, I suspect self-survival is pretty high priority for them. The neocons, I think, are a different thing. I think that, with the kind of sort of messianic vision they have, they could, I think, want to escalate to the point of no return. And that's my worry.
I agree with you there. They have this messianic complex, T-Tom says, "What is the role of the Vatican in all of this? Remember its role in World War II and Yugoslavia wars. They were always putting in conflict. They were always putting in conflict Slavs, Orthodox, and Muslims for Catholic benefits."
Yes, I mean, I think we must be very careful when we talk about the church and the Catholic Church, because, of course, there were lots and lots of Catholics who were strongly opposed to all of these things. And, we mustn't talk about the whole church being like this. This particular Pope, Francis, has clearly taken a very strong pro-Ukrainian line. That was extremely unwise. I know that's aggravated the very strong anti-Catholic feelings which always exist in Russia. And for you to know how strong those are, I mean, just read some Russian novels, particularly those by Dostoevsky, or listen to Mussorgsky's opera, you know, Boris Godunov, for example, or an even earlier opera by Glinka, A Life of the Tsar, and you'll see how strong, you know, this anti-Catholic tradition is in Russia. And the reason it exists is partly because lots of Russians have come to believe that the Catholic Church as an institution is a Western institution which is hostile to them. And this is, I think, Francis has lent force to that belief, which is a tragedy, because to my absolute certain knowledge, many, many Catholics, particularly conservative Catholics in Britain and in the United States, take diametrically opposite views, and many of them have a great sympathy and empathy for the Russian people. So it's most unfortunate that the Pope has taken this particular line.
A pillbox says, is there any credence to the narrative that the world is the stage and Putin is just controlled opposition by the elites, or are there legit sides here?
I think there are definitely legit sides. I think the idea that Putin is controlled has been disintegrated. I mean, given that they're talking about war crimes trials, I mean, he would hardly allow himself to be put in that position, it seems to me. I mean, it would take a peculiar fanaticism to get him there. And as for him being controlled, well, to be straightforward about it, I see no sign of it.
Yeah. Vulcanist says, great work, gents. Keep it up. AWOL, welcome to the Duran community. Chris says, for UK viewers, Gonzalo's opinion on Churchill is very uncommon. Americans believe Europe would be an NAZI or communist if it weren't for his finest hour. Thank you.
Churchill's an extraordinarily complicated man. I'm not sure what Gonzalo's view about him is. By the way, one of my very earliest memories, I was in London at the time on a trip. I was obviously very young, but I remember watching Churchill's funeral on television, and I remember the enormous effect it had on the mood here in Britain. It was one of those colossal events that, you know, you just feel, and which people still talk about today. But anyway, Churchill was an extraordinary figure. The thing to understand about Churchill is that he came from the absolute top of the British imperial upper classes. His whole purpose was to preserve Britain as he saw it, which meant the leadership of his particular class, as well as Britain's role in the world. That doesn't mean that he wasn't at the same time somebody who didn't show enormous courage and great brilliance, and who didn't also sometimes find himself, as a result of these things that he was doing, on the side of good. So, you know, he's a complicated figure. I don't know what Gonzalo has to say. He's certainly somebody we need to talk about. And you'll find a lot of people very critical of Churchill in lots and lots of places around the world, not just in Chile, I presume, but in Greece, in all sorts of places.
Joseph says, share the worry about the U.S. neocons. Thanks for the great info you two provide. Thank you for that, Joseph. And Suzanne says, child sacrifice in the West, it takes the form of abortion. Let's get real here.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, thank you for making that point. I mean, you know, I'm not sure it's sacrifice, but I understand the point you're making.
Elena Diaz says, for what I see, a lot of people in the Donbass wave red flags. Do they long for the Soviet? Do you think they will be disappointed?
I think the reason they're doing it, I mean, first of all, I would say the Donbass was a very, very pro-communist region. I mean, it was, you know, it's a coal mining, iron and steel region. This is, you know, the proletariat. This is very much an area where the communists were always very strong. So there may be some lingering feelings about this, but overwhelmingly, I think the reason you're seeing lots of these Soviet flags appearing all over, and not just in Donbass, you see them in Russia too now, is because it identifies with the war, the wartime struggle against fascism. This is the flag that the Russian people fought fascism under. So to the extent that they see this as a continuation of that war, it's not surprising that they're bringing out that flag again. It doesn't necessarily point to a particular political outcome once the war is ended.
Yeah. Bikara says, can you have Martianov on, Andre? Yes, we would love to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think he's one of the best on the military analyzing side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's very, very good. Patriarch Bartholomew is also pro-Ukraine. He is the one who started much of the problem.
Yeah. True.
Very true.
I mean, yeah. I have to say, I mean, you know, his willingness to do what the American ambassador to Greece basically wanted, I felt it very, very badly, given the position of the Patriarch of Constantinople in the history of Orthodoxy and in the history of the Greek people.
Alexander says, regarding the anti-Catholic sentiment in Russia, the Catholic Church historically tried to force Russia back into the Catholic Church. Look up Saint Alexander Nevsky for an example.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, just as I say, it certainly exists, and Francis has exacerbated it. And as I said, he's undone the work of a lot of Catholics, and of course, he's gone against the sentiments of a lot of Catholics.
Maru says, for anyone interested, including Alex Alexander, may I recommend a YouTube series called Orthodoxy, Autocracy, Nationalism, Origin Story of Greeks and Slavs by one Apostolic Majesty and his co-hosts. Yes, we will check that out. Recommended. Thank you, Marcos, for that. Darlene, welcome to the Drag community. Rich says, whenever Poland has its own state, it miraculously finds a leader that provokes the Russians so much that Poland finds itself under Russian protection.
Well,
interesting.
It's an interesting point. I mean, can I just say one of the things that has to happen in Europe if we're going to really establish peace in Europe is that Poles and Russians have so much in common, who get on so well at a personal level, need to finally put aside their political, historical issues and just get on with each other, which they can do, and they can do marvelously well. I've seen it in London.
JM says, has Putin taking over Ukraine always been Putin's plan or the West's plan?
No, it's the West's plan. I mean, I think that's let's be straightforward. Let's remember, how did this all begin? It began with a coup in Kiev. Putin didn't organize that. The West did. I don't think Putin was interested in Ukraine, very interested in Ukraine, up to 8 years ago. I think that was his mistake, by the way. He was sending all these duff characters. I say duff characters, people who were useless as Russia's ambassador to Kiev. He neglected massively any attempt to try to develop a kind of soft power, Russian soft power influence in Ukraine. And I think he became far more focused in Ukraine after 2014, but he did so in response to steps taken by the West.
All right. Would love it if you guys could have Neil Oliver on Coast Guy. That would be great to have Neil Oliver as well. Yeah. Those are big names to get on too. I mean, they're hard to get on, but yeah, that would be incredible. Yes. Divine Insurgent says the PLA may be behind in some aspects, but one aspect the China PLA is ahead of everyone else including the USA's artificial intelligence and cyber warfare.
Okay.
Very true. Very true. Mike Watts says, if you had a time machine and could bring back a U.S. president to navigate the current predicament, who would it be? P.S. It can't be Kennedy.
Tough question.
Reagan.
Well, Reagan, FDR, those two.
Anamika says, Zelensky behaving like a terrorist organization by kidnapping Viktor Medvedchuk and then trying to trade him with the Azovs. It's got all the hallmarks of terrorism.
I think it was like a gangster play, to be straightforward.
Yeah,
I mean, it was Dave. I mean, showing the poor man in handcuffs with a camouflage jacket, and he looked terrible, by the way. And by the way, I should say straight away at this point, and before I proceed, that I got this one completely wrong. I thought Medvedchuk had been sprung from house arrest by the Russians and was being prepared by the Russians to take over. Well, that was clearly completely wrong. So I want to say that I do get things wrong, and I got that one completely wrong. But the rumor on the Runet is that he was never out of custody at all, that the whole story about him skipping house arrest was just because he'd been taken away somewhere by the Ukrainians. Certainly, where he looked terrible in that picture. I mean, his physical condition seemed to have markedly deteriorated. And then parading him in handcuffs with that camouflage jacket, I thought was absolutely shocking.
Imre says, no coffee breaks. This will be a short write. Thank you, Imre, for that. David March says, have you thought of expanding beyond U2? Beyond us?
We have. We're on lots of places. Locals.
No, but
go on.
Beyond
go
us.
on. Rumble.
Expanding between me and you, like other. We're trying to get more and more guests.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, of course, yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
but I mean, it's hard work. It is hard work.
Hard work. It's hard work. Yeah. That's where a producer comes in handy. Absolutely. Yeah. Hermes Triss says, any chance of conducting the call-in shows again? Yeah, we're working on that.
We're working on. I mean, again, those were pretty intense as well, if I can say. But we would do. Yeah.
We're working that. Lady Cosmica says, we all appreciate the hard work, lads, including looks at Alex C. When streams go over the 2-hour mark, keep it up, lads. We're trying. We're trying to keep up with everything. Lot of work, a lot of news. Michelle North says, I brought my coffee with me. Got to come prepared for the Duran. Thank you for that. Michelle Pablo says, I took Pentagon not saying that Ukraine forces sunk the Russian ship as the U.S. having some involvement in the attack.
Well, I know a lot of people are saying this, and there's been some talk in this way. I'd have thought that even if the Pentagon was involved, they wouldn't have said that they didn't know. They'd have said it was the Ukrainians who did it. Why wouldn't they say it? I mean, it gives the Ukrainians a fillip. They don't have to admit that they themselves were involved. So I would have thought that if the Pentagon were involved, they would give the credit to the Ukrainians. The fact that they didn't give the credit to the Ukrainians makes me think that the Russian explanation is the more plausible one. But I might be wrong.
Ramon says, gentlemen, do you know about the ransomware virus attack on the schools and police departments in New Mexico? FBI says it was Russia. Any thoughts?
Well, they always say it was Russia. If it's not Russia, it's China. If it's not China, it's North Korea. But I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't heard that story.
Why would Russia launch ransomware attacks like that in New Mexico? Surely, if it's happening at the moment, they have more important things to worry about.
Yeah. Hermes says another guest would be Andrew Karibko.
Yeah.
Another guest. Yeah. Indigo Jones says, as neolibs and neocons merge, so grows a right-left anti-war voting bloc. Could it merge like the Brexit Party? It's a
very good question. It's a very good comment. And by the way, we were talking about Dugin before. I mean, one of his major points is that that's exactly what ought to happen. That's just one of the major things he was talking about in, things like the fourth ideology or whatever it was, the fourth political theory, that divisions between right and left are now obsolete, and people need to think of what Dugin defines as liberalism as the true enemy. Well, one would like to think so, but I have to say it's still incredibly difficult to imagine. And I have to also say that in France at the moment, where that's a particularly pressing issue, I still think that most left-wing voters who voted for Mélenchon are going to end up voting for Macron, even though they hate Macron, because he's seen as more centrist than Le Pen, who's on the right. So I'm afraid we're very far from that point yet.
Sarah says, Russo-Turkish war episode in the future, please. Love you guys.
Oh, yeah.
Great idea.
There were lots of those, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Thank
you for that, Sarah. Yep, absolutely. John says, please get Max Blumenthal on your programs. Yeah. That would be a fantastic show. These are big names. We will try. But yeah, Max would be super. How do I open my eyes? How do I open the eyes of my friends and free them from this propaganda? They believe India funded this war by buying oil. Oh boy.
Well, I don't know. I mean, what can I say? I mean, it's one can just
give it time. Give it time.
Exactly.
Give it time. Yeah, and then they'll come to their senses. I hope. The truth always finds a way to get out.
I think it does.
Always. Sancho says, still waiting for the French-Canadian classic dish poutine to be renamed frites de liberté to go with my orange Fanta. That's a fantastic comment. Thank you very much for that. Moro says, most of my money goes to Bitcoin. The rest I send to you all. Thank you very much for that, Moro. Zariel says, oh, by the way, guys, congrats on breaking the 200,000 sound barrier. Well deserved. Thank you, Zariel, for that. Thank you to everybody. That. We all got there together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Reporting some very tough stories over the last couple of years. Very tough stories, and this one's a tough one as well. But we're getting the truth out there as best we can. Cactus Ray, thank you very much for that super sticker. Let's see, Kylie, thank you for that super sticker. Zook says, afternoon, gentlemen, happy Easter. What are your opinions on Churchill's Operation Unthinkable?
I'm afraid there's so many operations that Churchill was involved in. I'm not sure what that one was. I should say that Churchill was something of an enthusiastic amateur when it came to military operations, and he wasn't always very reliable, and they didn't always turn out very well. If it is a military operation that you're referencing, and if you talk about Australians, people, and they remember Gallipoli, which Churchill was heavily involved in, very vividly. So I'm afraid I don't know what Operation Unthinkable was. If you could tell us, I might be able to comment about it.
Poppy, thank you for that super sticker. One sec, Alexander. T-Tom says, do you know the percentage of different religions and nations in concentration camps during World War II? What is the percentage of Jews, Slav Jews, Orthodox French, and Belgians?
What, in the Second World War?
The Second World War, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And I've just looked up Operation Unthinkable. This was a plan, apparently, to launch some kind of an attack on the Soviet Union, or so it seems. I mean, it seems astonishing. Anyway, it's something that I can't really discuss at the moment because I'm not able to discuss it very much. This is a post-Second World War plan of Churchill's, apparently preparing for a war with the Soviets.
Yeah. Jean Martin says, are viruses exosomes? I think I'm reading that right.
No, I wouldn't be able to say. Yes.
That question, but yeah.
Whilst we're talking, just on the subject of Churchill and the Soviets, I mean, I think one of the things to say about Churchill, and this is why I say he's a complicated man, he might in 1945-46, when he was coming up with Operation Unthinkable, be planning war on the Soviets. But in the early 1950s, on the contrary, he was making a very big effort to try to come to some kind of a rapprochement with them in order to end the Cold War. Now, that wasn't because he'd stopped being an anti-communist or anything like that. It was because he saw the Cold War as robbing Britain of room for maneuver and making it very, very over-dependent on the US. And, of course, he failed. And apparently this absolutely threw him into a deep depression, which basically continued right up to the end of his life. As I said, Churchill is a complicated man.
OMG Puppy says Churchill started World War I by dragging Britain into Belgium, destroyed the empire. Chamberlain did not appease Hitler. He was counting on Hitler to attack the USSR. Churchill screwed up that plan and started a world war again.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, there's a lot to discuss. I mean, by the way,
there's a lot to talk about Hitler.
We're talking about Churchill.
Yeah,
he deserves a whole series as well. I mean, one of the reasons I get to just finish, and I mean, this is the last thing I really get to say about Churchill. I mean, the thing to understand about Churchill is that, with the partial exception of Margaret Thatcher, he was the last British leader who really did play a global role. And that's one of the reasons why the British are so focused on him, because he's the last real global, the last leader of Britain as a superpower, a genuine superpower. So programs on Churchill I'd love to do, and maybe we should, and maybe we would. But if we're talking about him on a live stream like this, I'm afraid the risk we run is that we'll be out talking about nothing else, because he's such a complicated and colossal figure in British history.
Jennifer says Jackson Hinkle was definitely banned from Twitch for sharing too much truth about Ukraine. He cites the Duran a lot. You are reliable sources. It would be great to watch you on each other's shows. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's get him on. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And shame on what Twitch did. Yeah. What else can you say? It's not right. Let's see. Indigo Jones says Max Blumenthal likes a Duran. Invite him on. We will do that. Yeah, we've got a lot of people to invite on. Yes. Let's see. Marco says, to what degree has the Anatolian catastrophe, German occupation, the Civil War, and Cyprus negatively impacted the Greek psyche into the modern day?
I think profoundly so. I mean, my grandfather, by the way, was one of the was with the Greek army in 1922 in that found itself in Smyrna, as it then was, Izmir as it is today. So I think it has had a massive effect on the Greek psyche. But again, this is a huge topic to discuss. It changed Greece. It changed our conception of what was Greece, because, it was much more expanded. It made Cyprus, it played a big role in creating the conflict in Cyprus. And it explains why Istanbul today, there is hardly any Greek presence there at all, whereas before the 1920s, I think Greeks accounted for a very significant part of the population of the city. So it's had a big effect. It's sort of drawn us more towards Greece. It's changed our conception of ourselves, and of course, it affected very much our belief in our conception of what our future would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, D Jungle says Eva Bartlett has been in many conflict situations such as Syria and Donbass. She would be a great invite. We were actually scheduled to have her on, and then she had to go to the Donbass and report from there, which she did the right thing. Absolutely. She's needed there. But when she gets back from the Donbass, definitely we'll have Eva on as well.
Yeah.
We need a show producer, Alexander.
We certainly do.
I think.
I mean, Alex is doing it all himself. I mean, he does everything.
I'm being honest,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, he does everything. I mean, it's anyway.
Awar says, I would like to hear both of your takes on what's the difference between the current actions of the EU as opposed to the old USSR. They seem very similar.
I think the similarities grow greater every day. I mean, we now have the Politburo in Brussels and the Obcom first secretaries running the various regions, which is what these once great nations of Europe are rapidly becoming, it seems to me. I mean, the extent to which a leader like Olaf Scholz, who is supposedly the Chancellor of Germany, allows himself to be bossed around by Ursula von der Leyen just astonishes me.
Yeah. Praven, thank you for that super chat. James says the Donbass people like red flags. They used ones when they declared independence in 1918 from the Ukraine after its borders were recognized by Germany. My history could be a bit wrong. Not an expert.
No, you're not.
I think that's a right take.
I mean, in 1918, as I say, it's a very, very strong Bolshevik communist area. And there's still that tradition there.
Yeah. Indigo Jones says, my sense is that neocons do not hail to the Davos crowd or anti-oil interests. Neocons' wars are oil-centric. Might they be easier to oust from the Republican Party to pursue an anti-war ticket?
I think they are easier to oust from the Republican Party, though they are still there. But I think you're right. I don't think that the Davos crowd and the neocons are exactly the same. There's a huge overlap. They meet, they talk to each other, they go to the same, parties, whatever. But they're not exactly the same. And the neocons are you know, the neocons are more American. The Davos crowd is more European, and I think there is that difference.
Yeah. Jennifer, welcome to the Duran community. Dimitrina, welcome to the Duran community. Kickjack says, people are asking for huge names. LOL, I just want 2 realistic ones. Any updates on Maneco 64? Working on it. Or getting Nick Recchietta through Barnes. We appreciate it. Nick Recchietta Law is a huge, it would be great. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Both Maneco 64 and Nick Recchietta. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We are going to have Barnes on next week. That's for sure. Let's see. Divided Surgeon says, is travel to Russia possible for the West? Many of the major credit card companies decided to do a bunch of dogmatic tools and cut off services. Should one do a money exchange? Recommendations?
It's become much more difficult. I don't know how. I don't know what the arrangements are. It's something that I'd have to discuss. Alex?
No. I think you can still, at least for Greece, you can still get visas in Cyprus. You can still get visas, though they're much harder to get. But it's the travel and paying for stuff there to be. There's no Visa. There's no MasterCard. You know, how do you get money out of an ATM, for example?
Well, you can't, I presume. You have to do what you used to do, go to a foreign exchange place and try and change your money into the local.
Will they?
Will they? Well, that's the big question. I don't know.
Will they exchange rubles? I don't know. I'm actually looking into it, so get back to me in a couple of weeks and maybe I'll have some more answers.
Yes.
Because it's really complicated now.
It is becoming very complicated.
Yeah. Multimedia Clips, welcome to the Drag community. Julian says, Alexander, I grew up in Nairobi and used a good day until teachers at the American school said I needed to choose between US and UK English in my speaking and writing. Oh, that's interesting.
That is very interesting, actually. But then, you know, speaking of which, I've got my good day mug with me, as always.
And finally, Indigo Jones says, Max Blumenthal likes the Duran, invite him. Well, we're big fans.
We will do it, and we're very grateful to him,
and
by the way.
Aaron and Jimmy Dore and Jackson Hinkle and so many great content creators that are doing a fantastic job. They really are.
Yes.
Sammy, thank you for that super sticker. Zaramug, thank you for that super sticker. We will try to get Max Blumenthal.
Yes.
I think one lesson to take away, Alexander, from all of this is we need someone on the producing end of things.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. But that's everything, Alexander.
Wow.
You see, I said we're going to go for only an hour and a half, and there you have it. An hour and
9 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 hours and 9 minutes. But it was a great program and wonderful. And, you know, we covered a huge amount of ground. I mean, I didn't think there was anything I came thinking that we would discuss on this live, which we ended up not discussing. And we discussed lots of things, as you know, in addition to that as well. And I've learned lots of things myself.
Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald.
Oh,
yes,
oops.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I mean, you got to remember, some of these names are very big. I don't even know if we've tried to get some big names on and we couldn't swing it, but we'll keep on trying.
I mean, the other thing is, you see, it's persistence. You need to have somebody who's, you know, able to follow up and, you know, contact people and arrange times. It's not easy. Yeah. It does take time.
It takes time. Yeah, absolutely.
Because these are busy people themselves. I mean, always remember
that's the part, is that everyone is The easy part is when you've done already one show with them, like, you know, like Gonzalo or Robert, who are huge names. You know, Viva Frey and Robert Barnes have a massive channel and massive following, as does Gonzalo now as well. But once you do the first show, then it's so much easier to just, you know, shoot off a message or email and say, can you come on? This time. And they already know what programs you use. It's just a lot easier.
Yes.
But you have to get that first one out of the way. And that one is the hard one. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Balka says Matt Taibbi used to live in Russia. Yes, he did.
He did, absolutely. He co-edited with The Exile with Mark Ames. And that is amongst the expat community of that time, anybody who was involved at that time. That is a legend. I mean, it really was.
He is a legend, from what I understand. He is a legend, Matt Taibbi. Yeah, fantastic guy. All right. That is everything. Brian says, great show, guys. Thank you, Brian. Valias says, butterfly kisses to the twins. Alexander.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much. Pass that on. Yeah. Absolutely. Pass those kisses on.
Yes. And thank you to our moderators. Valias Zariel, Lady Cosmica, Alan Watson. Who else? Reckless Abandon. Who else? I think Reckless Abandon, you speak fluent Russian, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Reckless Abandon put some great posts on locals. The duran.locals.com. Absolutely. Check us out there. The Duran shop. Any final words, Alexander?
No, it was a tremendous program. But as I said, the war is intensifying. And we will probably be seeing, I suspect, big moves over the next couple of days in Donbass to keep an eye out on those. And of course, heavens knows what's coming in terms of the Pacific and what new ideas that Ursula and Charles Michel and all those people and Borrell are cooking up in Europe.
Moromoto sent a super chat that says, was the movie Z close to true regarding Greece?
It was extremely close to true regarding Greece. I remember that time very, very well. That's a good question, by the way. How on earth do you market this film now, given what it was? Z, by the way, in Greek, it means life too. He's alive. But there were people murdered in exactly that kind of way. And because of the political demographic I belong to, the demographic I belong to, you know, I was very close to seeing things like that. And, you know, I lived in the bubble where those kind of things happened.
All right. And a final super chat from Iris. This person I think we can get on actually tomorrow, Iris. This person we can get on a show tomorrow. Alexander, if you're free tomorrow, Iris recommends that we get one Vladimir Putin on the channel.
Oh, of course. I mean, after all, you know, we're in touch with him all the time. I mean, I'm about to speak to him in the next few minutes, and you know, he's going to explain to me all his plans, and I'm going to give him all my advice. So, you know, he's absolutely guaranteed we can have him tomorrow without any trouble.
Yeah, thank you, Iris, for that. That's fantastic. Yeah. That's a great way to close the show, Iris.
Absolutely.
We leave it to Iris to close the show. Thank you very much.